First up is general public comment. If anybody has public comments, they need a little yellow slip to Derica. Got one so far. Yes.
Hey, Derek. Could you grab John? John. Oh, sure.
So first up will be Claire Clock from Clock Farm, responding to items L, post-fire, and J, strategic plan.
Good morning, everyone. Claire Clock, Corbett, Oregon. I have a couple of comments on yesterday's agenda. As I have started natural resource advocacy a few years ago, I've been trying to think more before I open my mouth. And so these two items were, as far as post-fire, the idea of post-fire response on private lands. And I got to thinking that if ODF can respond to a fire immediately within 15 minutes or half an hour or an hour, then why can't an organization respond with grass seeding on 100-foot buffers of each of those streams in those on the private lands within a few weeks or a few months? Farms do it all the time when they take the crops off and they reseed their ground within a few weeks, a few months in the fall to take advantage of that growing season and stabilize the ground a little bit. So I don't see, well, it takes work, yes, it takes work and takes money, but set up a mechanism where maybe another state agency concerned with water quality, DEQ, ODF&W, ODA, whatever, would take that and be able to have a quick response team for those types of things. The second thing, making it short, is the strategic plan. Jason brought up yesterday, mentioned about small acreages, and I have a small acreage, and a number of my, I basically serve small acreages in my capacity as a conservation specialist over the last 20 years. And we find that small acreages are passed up by land trust, by conservation districts, by NRCS, by ODF&W for help in environmental and wildlife habitat programs. ODF&W has basically suspended the Oregon Wildlife Habitat Conservation Program because of employee, as far as staffing, that type of stuff. Anyway, I know that as far as conservation easement on small acreages is in producing a conservation plan on small acreages is disproportionately long compared to the acreage than larger acreages. However, how about actively recruiting adjacent landowners within a specified distance in the process and combine the parties and get it all done at the same time? I know including more property owners in the process complicates things, and we've seen rather large, complications, but we've also seen real success stories by combining property owners, adjacent property owners, and making more effect as far as conservation on the ground on more of a landscape scale than a small acreage scale. Questions or anything? Thank you much.
Thank you. Next up, where's my paper here? John Keith.
So, good morning. I'm John Keith. I'm the new Executive Director for Oregon Association of Conservation Districts. This is officially my 11th day, so it's been quite the whirlwind, and so definitely in the listen, learn, and gather mode, and so I'm glad to be here to partake in the meeting, but also get a chance to meet everybody, because I think, as we all know, this OWEB and this board and the Oregon Conservation Partnership is just critical to the future of Oregon. So even though I'm maybe new to this group, I'm not new to Oregon. I worked for Forest Service in Elgin and Ukiah, Oregon, worked in Tillamook for BLM, been back and forth to DC several times with Interior. So I've come to appreciate the political side, but also what needs to happen on the ground. So I was excited to get the opportunity to apply for this position and get the position. So it's really been interesting to see how best we can move forward. And as we move forward, I hope we can interact more with me. I understand there's been a vacancy in this position for a while, and so looking forward to moving forward with that. But I did want to mention a few things that have been going on that I think may be of interest to this group. The OECD strategic plan is nearing completion, and like your strategic plan, communication, collaboration, advocacy is right up top of our list. Our members would like to see us move forward in a number of different directions, and we need to do it together. Part of that is a partnership with NRCS. 3 of our districts have gotten technical assistance grants, Umatilla, Deschutes, and Lynn County. And so we hope to get a little more money before March deadline is done. And I just returned from Nashville at the National Association of Conservation District annual meeting. And several of the resource policy groups are very applicable to Oregon and also this group. The Public Lands Group was struggling to find, do they still have a role? And of course they do. And we were trying to encourage them to keep on going. Sage grouse, obviously top of the list there. Forestry Group is also looking at some policy initiatives, invasives. And there was a new group called the Coastal Resource Policy Group. We were fortunate to get Pat Fitzgerald, who is the board president for OECD, to volunteer for that commission. And with Tidegate being a big issue here, I think that'll really help. And I was encouraged by reading the strategic plan and the Oregon Conservation Partnership portions of those, because we're going to be meeting here February 8th and talking more about how we can move forward together now that I'm in this position. So I'm excited about where we're headed. And again, thank you for letting me be here.
Any questions for John? Maida?
This is Maida. I'll just, we had an opportunity, John and I, to meet a few weeks back on he started for a little while and then got an opportunity to go to New Zealand, right, John? And then
That's correct.
Come back. I would just say from the OWEB staff's end, we are thrilled that John is on board. As he noted, there was a gap in time frame while they did an extensive search to find John. And we're really excited. I think just a reminder, they share office space with the network of Oregon Watershed Councils. We invest heavily in that partnership of Coalition of Land Trusts, OECD, and the network. So, John, we're thrilled that you're on board.
Well, thank you.
Randy Labby for the record. Good morning. I'd like to direct the board's attention to item L, tab L in your book. We're going to finish up the director's update, and our first presenter for 2 items is Courtney Schaff.
Good morning. For the record, Courtney Schaff. So we are starting with the L3, which is the Focused Investment Partnership Capacity Grants. This is just a brief update for the board after the last. I'll give folks a minute to flip through. It should be halfway through the director's update there. This is an update after the last board meeting where we did award the partnership, the FIP capacity building, now soon to be development grants. And we had a conversation with the board about offering these grants again this biennium. And so this is an update on the proposed schedule to announce the next grant offering and when we would review and award the grants, as well as just a heads up to you all that through the rulemaking process, We discussed the name of the Focused Investment Capacity Building Grants, and with the Rules Advisory Committee, there was some suggestions about how to improve the name within the granting world. Capacity building has a meaning that most people are used to, and we didn't feel like that was actually what the purpose of these grants were. So with the help of the RAC, we came up with the name change for the development FIPS, which will be in the rules that you guys will adopt after the director's update today. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece, if you look at the bottom of the director's update, is the proposed schedule for the new development FIP grants that we would offer later on this biennium. The idea being that we are working internally right now on updating the language, clarifying some of the pieces that our previous applicants found a little bit confusing. Do a rollout at Connect in April to announce the next grant offering, get the materials out there, do the consultations again in the summer, have applications due in October, and then you would award the final development FIP grants for this biennium in January 2019. Are there any questions?
This is Randy. Wondering what your expectation is as to the number of applicants.
I've had some great conversations with some of the applicants that were do not fund from this previous round, and I'm actually going to be going to some of their meetings after April to talk about the offering. And interestingly, probably I've had 3 phone calls with other group partnerships that did not apply, that weren't ready, or maybe they weren't sure if it was for them, but after the further conversations I'd had with them, I do think it's a good fit. So I'm hoping to do a little bit more outreach and communication to get folks that maybe weren't hearing about the program, that we weren't targeting last time, or maybe we should do enough outreach about the application process and deadline. So we never really know, but it could be up to a dozen or half a dozen, somewhere around there.
Anybody else have a question on this item?
Yes.
Yes, Jan.
Yes, Jan Lee. I was wondering how many people have received the financial grants to prepare for a FIP?
Yeah. So the financial, so you're talking about the development FIP grant,
Right.
the financial plan. So we have awarded to date 12 development FIP grants. So we awarded 8 in the first biennium, and then at the last board meeting, the board awarded 4 additional ones. So we have 8 current development FIP grants, and then we have funding left over from what the board allocated for development FIPs this biennium, so we're planning on offering an additional cycle to spend down those funds.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, do you go on to the Columbia River update?
Katie Duzick is going to join me, our Region 1 program rep. Good morning. It's also her birthday, so be nice.
Welcome, Katie.
The best way to be nice is just to move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Maida. So this is agenda item L4, and for our new board members, at the July board meeting, the OWEB board awarded council capacity grants for the 17-19 biennium. OWEB staff at that board meeting had recommended one of the watershed councils as a do not fund. After a robust conversation with the board recommended 1 year of funding for that watershed council and asked OWEB staff to work with them, check in on them throughout the year, and go through an additional review process and make a new recommendation to the board in June of 2018 whether to award the additional year of funding. As part of that process, Katie and I are providing a director's update at each board meeting to let you know where we are in working with that council. Part of this director's update includes a progress report submitted by the council. They are required to submit regular progress reports as part of their grant agreement, and so wanted to provide this progress report to you. The council has hired Sean Morford, who spoke yesterday, the executive director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, as their consultant to work with them through meeting OWEB's grant requirements, which are our 5 merit criteria. So Sean wrote this report as part of her contract for the council. A couple other updates. The council coordinator, who did come to the meeting in July, has resigned. She is an employee of the district and was splitting her time between the council and the district, and did request that the district move her full-time back to her district position. So the council is without a coordinator right now. They are planning on beginning a hiring process. I attended the January board meeting, and they talked about the hiring process and their work that they are doing with Sean. They are holding officer elections at their February board meeting, which would be the first time they indicated in quite a while that they have had officer elections. So we are happy that they are holding officer elections. And so we won't be attending their February meeting. We're trying to give them some space in between our attending meetings and not. And Katie will attend their March meeting. And then we are working with them currently to set up the dates where we will do the council capacity interview, and that will be the first week of May. Any questions? You and
It's also worth noting that we did have a number of conditions on their grant agreement that they were required to meet for a first fund request, including updated MOU with the district, and we have yet to receive those items, and they haven't been billing on the grant, so we haven't been able to stay on top of where they are with those discussions with the district. So,
This is Randy. Thank you. Doesn't appear to be any other questions.
great. Thank you very much.
We'll have Eric Williams come up. Just for the benefit of the new board members, when Courtney refers to robust conversation, that's code for respectful disagreement. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Chairman Labby, members of the board. For the record, Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager at OWEB. And we're on item L5 in the Director's Update, which is regarding the State Revolving Fund loan application for septic system upgrades. So this is a bit of a new topic, I think, for the board. Recently, within the past 6 months, we had been in contact with an organization called Craft 3, which is a nonprofit community development finance organization that operates throughout Oregon and Washington, about some work that they've recently done on making loans for individual septic system upgrades, which, as you might be aware, is a pretty urgent need in some geographies where there's compact residential development and no access to utilities and nearby water bodies that might suffer from excess nutrients and bacteria from these facilities. 2 years ago, the Oregon legislature made a special appropriation to make a loan available to an organization who would then in turn loan that money at low interest rates to individual homeowners in need of septic system repair. Through a competitive bidding process, Craft 3 was selected as the entity to receive the loan from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and then in turn make individual loans to homeowners. And this is a business that they're familiar with and comfortable with. They often make loans for community development projects. They have a very, to use a similar word, robust system to make those loans, to work on credit accessibility, credit determinations, to have loan reserve funds in case loans go bad, and procedures in place to deal with that. For the septic system program, they also have a sliding scale of interest rates. So the interest rate that you receive as a person that accesses a loan for a septic system is dependent on your household income. And in some cases, there are principal-only payments for a while, and there are systems in place to deal with property transfers and things of that nature. Through that special appropriation, Craft 3 to date has executed more than $800,000 in loans for individual septic system upgrades. However, they are approaching the limit of the funds that were made available to them under that special appropriation. And so Craft 3 approached OWEB to see if we would like to partner with them on an additional loan through DEQ State Revolving Fund Program. The reason for that is that the State Revolving Fund Program is set up to make loans basically to government entities. Their typical customer at DEQ is a municipality who might want a wastewater treatment plant upgrade or some other wastewater infrastructure upgrade. And so CRAF 3 itself is not an eligible entity to apply to the SRF program for a loan. So they approached us to see if we were interested in partnering with them, where OWEB would become the applicant to DEQ for a state revolving fund loan. OWEB would enter into an agreement with CRAF 3 to administer the loan and execute individual loans to people in need of septic system upgrades and pay back the loan to DEQ through OWEB. So this is a significantly different undertaking from what we're typically used to. And so what we wanted to do is come to the board today more as an informational item as we're working through this process with DEQ. We don't have any agreements at this time for you to authorize or to execute. But the process with DEQ is that when a project is, when there's a project application made to DEQ, DEQ puts that application on what they call their intended use plan, which is essentially a priority list of projects that they're interested in making loans for. When a project is on that list, it doesn't imply any requirement or intent on DEQ's part to make that loan. It opens up a public comment period on the application, which we recently went through, and that closed on January 7th. Once that public comment period is complete, then DEQ will accept further applications and documents for approval to enter into a loan with the applicant. So that's where we're at in this process. We filed an application with DEQ. We had this project put on the intended use plan priority list, went through the public comment period, and now we're at the stage of working out the details of agreements between OWEB and DEQ and between OWEB and CRAF 3 that would execute these loan agreements. And so what we would intend to do as we work through this process with DEQ and develop these documents is come back to the board for authorization to enter into any agreements that would implement this loan program. A couple other notes about it. One of the reasons that we were interested when CRAF 3 approached us is that there are watersheds around the state that do have issues with nutrients affecting water quality in their watersheds. And in many of those watersheds, the source of those nutrients are improperly designed or older non-functioning septic systems. And so we felt that this could be another tool in the toolbox for a local watershed council if they are facing this problem, where they could direct their constituents to this loan program that would be operated by CRAF 3, where people in their watersheds can access low-interest loans to upgrade those septic systems. And so that's the interest on our part, and that's also the interest on DEQ's part. The State Revolving Fund program is in place to address water quality problems, and so we do have an intersection of our missions in this regard. The part that's new, of course, would be that OWEB would be taking on a loan obligation, which is something we haven't done. We did some checking with our attorneys at the Department of Justice to make sure that we've got the authority to do that, and they affirmed that we do. In fact, it's in state statute that DEQ must make these loans available to other state agencies. And so we felt that we had the legal clearance to move forward with this. And so, as I said earlier, the next steps would be to work out some of the details of the arrangement and then come back to the board to see if you would like to authorize us to execute those agreements. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
This is Randy Mehta.
Maida Lofsgarden, for the record, I am putting on the hat for just a moment of the EQC representative because we don't have one. But Richard Whitman, who's the director of Department of Environmental Quality, wanted me to relay to you all their strong interest in this program and the struggle that they had. They think this is an excellent program and didn't have the ability to loan directly to CRAF 3. So they were, I think, at the policy level, they're appreciative of OWEB's interest in this program. We have a relationship separately with CRAF 3 around around acquisition loans. So they will come in from time to time if a loan acquisition needs to close before we're ready to close it. They actually go in, provide a small loan to the land trust, and then it gets paid back with our funding. So we have a relationship. We know Craft 3. We trust them. The one thing that Director Whitman wanted me to make sure that you all knew as well is for the state, this is also a diversity environmental justice issue. And the reason is there are homes, of course, and it is incredibly difficult. I'm a homeowner with a septic system, and if you have to replace it, it's not cheap. But there are also many trailer courts around the state that have failing septic systems. And what they've seen happen is instead of paying for that expensive upgrade at a low or no interest loan, they shut down the trailer court, and those people no longer have low income housing. And so while this is an issue in many watersheds, and Eric's right, there's a strong nexus with our water quality program, there also is an issue for those areas that we just are really lacking in affordable housing. And this can be the tipping point for some of those facilities. And of course, we want them to have meet the environmental requirements as well. I'll take off that hat now.
Yes, Jan, did you have a question?
Yes, not a question. This is Jan Lee. Our Soil and Water Conservation District took out a loan with DEQ for this same program, and it's been quite successful, although we've only had it less than a year. One thing we had them do was to sign an agreement that we were able to file a lien if it was an extensive loan. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Randy. Let's go Rosemary and then Jason.
Thank you, Eric. Rosemary Furphy for the record. Sounds like a wonderful opportunity, meeting a need. My one question would be about time demands on OWEB staff. I'm just wondering how you factor that into the very busy schedule you all have. And
yes.
Otherwise, it sounds like a great program.
Thank you. For the record, Eric Williams. We had the exact same concern when we first started talking with Craft 3 about this. And what we realized after talking with them about the structure of it and the mechanics of it is that Craft 3 really does almost all of the legwork. So they do all the due diligence for executing the loans. They have loan reserve accounts in place. They have processes in place to deal with that. They have all the direct contact with the homeowners. And so from OWEB's perspective, our staff involvement would really be on the business side of making the financial transfers. So the loan money would come from DEQ to OWEB, and then we would in turn loan it to Craft 3. And Craft 3 would make the repayments. We may still have an option where those repayments could go directly from Craft 3 to DEQ, but we haven't worked that out or received affirmation of that from DEQ. We may have to have the money come back from Craft 3 to OWEB to DEQ. But in terms of staff demands, it's mainly on our fiscal staff to process the financial transfers.
And that answered my question as well. I was just going to ask about capacity and capabilities, so thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, Meg.
Meg Reeves. Eric, is it not yet worked out who the so OWEB would be the lender in this situation? Is that?
For the record, Eric Williams, we would borrow the funds from DEQ, and in turn, Craft 3 would borrow them from us. And so the individuals would be making loans through Craft 3,
Okay.
not through OWEB.
OWEB won't have any relationship with individuals?
No.
Just with Craft 3?
Just with Craft 3,
Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you.
This is Randy. Thank you, Eric. Any other questions? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Will Newhouser for the record. Next up is item M, the Focused Investment Partnership Administrative Rules by the Erics. So as you may notice, the co-chairs are running us ahead of schedule once again. So we're going to put this ahead of the break, because otherwise we'd be breaking right now.
Great. So good morning, Mr. Co-Chairs, members of the board. For the record, Eric Hartstein, Policy Coordinator. First, I guess I will apologize for the text-heavy slides that we have here. Just can't find any really good, exciting pictures when you're doing administrative rules or fancy graphics. But the good news is that there's not that many slides. So a little background first. The Focused Investment Partnerships Program, or FIP for our new board members, has been operating since 2016 under our broad OWEB grant program rules. And now that FIP is entering its second biennium and we've learned a lot about administering the program, we want to incorporate some of these lessons learned into administrative rules that are specific to the FIP program. So at the July board meeting, the board authorized rulemaking for FIP program, which included the development of a Rules Advisory Committee, or a RAC, that Courtney mentioned earlier this morning. And the RAC was really great at helping us develop language, bounce ideas off of as we're doing the process. And I really can't thank them enough for the job that they did helping us out here. I'd point out that attachment A is the composition of the RAC for the FIP program. And so we met one time in the fall for about 3/4 of a day to go over the rule, some ideas to incorporate into the rules, and then drafted various iterations of language for the RAC to look at, and on 2 separate occasions ran the draft rules by the FIP subcommittee. In December, we released a draft for public comment, and we received comments from 1 individual and 1 organization, and the summary document is found in attachment B of those comments. And now I'd like to turn your attention to attachment C, which is the proposed FIP rules. And I think what we would like to discuss first is where we see some of the high-level policy discussions that are included in the FIP rules. So what we'll do is we'll highlight those in this presentation, and after each of the slides, we'll ask if these policy discussions, the issues that we've raised, are clear, and that if you'd like to return to any of them at the end of the presentation. And then we'll also ask if there's something that we went through that you noted that we missed something, a high-level policy issue, that we can also return to that rule at the end of the presentation. So in general, as we go through these, they will be in order, with the exception of this one, which is actually the very last rule, which is on page 7. It's 695-047-0140. It's the waiver and periodic review of rules. And so this is standard language that we're incorporating into all of OWEB's rules, which provides the director flexibility to waive rules in certain circumstances. And what we've highlighted here, it's in the underlined and in italics, is the statement that any waiver of the requirements of Division 47 will be reported to the board on at least an annual basis. And so what we're acknowledging here is that this is still a new program, and I think we're still learning lessons, and that if we do waive any of the rules found within this division, that we will report back to the board as to one, what rule was waived, and provide an explanation as to why that rule was waived. So is this clear? And I'll ask if any board members want to return to this at the end of the presentation.
Mr. Randy, Bob?
I know at ODFW, the director has the power to make temporary rules that are effective until our next meeting. And then they're either adopted by the board or not, and if they weren't, they would no longer be effective. And I'm wondering, would that process work in this situation?
For the record, Eric Williams. I think because we have, as Eric mentioned, general program rules governing grant making, we've been relying on those to execute grants under the Focused Investment Partnership Initiative, and didn't feel the need to create a temporary set of rules for that, given that we have those in place. These rules will more specifically articulate some of the nuances of that Focused Investment Partnership grant making effort.
I think this is made, I think the question might have been different. And
What I'm saying is that at ODFW, at every meeting, we review any, in this case would be any waiver that the director did in the preceding period between meetings to evaluate whether we had agreed with that or not.
So this is Maida for the record. We have the same authority. The director can make temporary rules in the interim. We have found over time that our two things. One, our grant programs, unlike some of ODF&W rules, the waiver authority gives us enough authority that we don't generally, because our grant programs operate so slowly, we don't generally have a need to quickly make temporary rules. And we'll come back to this at the end, but the reason for this, so typically what I would waive is a grant agreement needs to be signed within 12 months of approval of a grant. And there may be somebody was sick or hurt, or a family death on the landowner's part, and we would waive that rule, and we wouldn't bring that to you. We would just say, there's extenuating circumstances, I can waive that rule. We've waived rules related to, I'm trying to think of other things, reinstatements, where a grant expired and we need to reinstate, and we don't bring that back to you. In this case, so we don't feel the need to make temporary rules. In this case, our concern is, and you'll see in some of the other rules, this is why Eric raised it first, there are cases where we can waive a rule, but I think you're going to want to know about it because you might want to make a permanent change. So there's no reason to make a quick change, but we want to make sure that you guys are seeing with this brand new program, this is the thing we're butting up against and we may want to fix it. So it won't be, since they're biennial grants, we'll have plenty of time to make a permanent change rather than temporary.
Jason Robinson for the record. So, Maida, would it be, to get to Bob's point, because I think I agree maybe a more timely response back to the board might be appropriate. So is there a way, instead of at least on an annual basis, as soon as a proposed rule is made or a change is made, that we, whether it's the next board meeting or however we want to do that, we shorten that up just as a report back to the board for an update, not saying that we need to do an approval at that point, but as soon as it's made, it comes back to the board. And I'm assuming that's probably what the process would be anyway, but just want to be clear on that.
For the record, Eric Hartstein, yes, Jason, I think we can make that change to any waiver of the requirements of Division 47 will be reported to the board at the next board meeting.
Other comments or suggestions on this topic?
Okay, so for the record, Eric Hartstein. So now I'd like to turn your attention back towards the beginning of the proposed rules, and We go to page 2, which is 0030, the board identified priorities of significance to the state. So we're not focusing right now on anything in either the purpose or the definitions sections. And just a reminder that if you've noted anything in those sections that you'd like us to return to, we can do that at the end of the presentation. This rule states that every 5 years, the board shall approve ecological priorities to be addressed by focused investment partnerships initiatives. Ecological priorities shall be determined with public input and scientific rigor and shall include maps and narrative describing the desired ecological outcomes for eligible focused investment partnership initiative activities. And so for background here, the board adopted ecological priorities for the FIP program in 2015. They include sagebrush, sage steppe, Oregon closed lakes, basin wetlands, dry type forests, oak woodlands and prairie, coho habitat and populations along the coast, aquatic habitat for native fish species, and coastal estuaries. And so what this rule is requiring is for the board to approve ecological priorities every 5 years. And so what that can include is renewing, revising, removing the existing priorities, or potentially adding new priorities in 2020, which would be 5 years after the board adopted the current priorities. So I'll stop here and ask if this is clear and if there are any issues that we should return to at the end.
Anybody? This is, Will, I do have one, which is we don't define significance of the state. And I remember exhaustive discussion about this when we were developing all this ages ago, but I don't remember whether we ever developed a definition or anything. So
it is to the board's discretion right now what you
determined to be of significance. Would that language be appropriate then to put in, or?
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, and I want to hold true to Eric's, he wants to come back at the end. I think just quick response, I actually think this covers it because you are designating, the board's designating, so you are determining significance.
Then the only suggestion I have is maybe change the title to board identified priorities and put the of significance of the state in the description. So every 5 years, the board shall approve ecological priorities of significance to the state. I don't know, for some reason that feels cleaner to me, but since we don't then talk about significance of the state in the definition. Bob?
Well, my question when I was reading this is why every 5 years? And may we want to do it sooner than that? I guess being more adaptive if it was necessary.
Let's bring this back to the end, so because we do want to make sure we hit everything. So Eric, if you can note that question for the end, so we make sure we get through all of them again.
Any other comments from board members? Thank you.
Okay. So next, we're going to hop ahead a few sections to 0060, which is the evaluation criteria for FIP implementation initiatives. And here I'd like to once again give a lot of credit to the RAC, who provided a lot of I think their expert opinion on how the FIP implementation initiatives should be evaluated on. So what we have here are 7 criteria, extent to which the initiative addresses a board identified priority, capacity to partner, engage the community, and catalyze additional investments within the initiative geography. And I'll note that we added a semicolon here, which was left out of the draft. The performance history and composition of the partnership, the extent to which the proposed approach will make progress toward measurable ecological outcomes, the ability to track progress towards proposed outcomes, scientific basis and planning tools that support the proposed initiative, and the extent to which the allocation of funds across proposed grant types will support the achievement of the proposed ecological outcomes. And I'd also point out that A, B, and C are the evaluation criteria for FIP development initiatives in the rules. So I'll pause here, ask if board members are clear, and if there are any issues we can return to at the end.
Steve?
Steve Brandt, just item C there on the performance history of the partnership. Isn't part of this also to sort of, because it's a big program, to create new partnerships that may not have existed? Does that somehow restrict the applicant pool?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein. So what we're looking for in subsection C, the performance history and composition of the partnership, is one, to see who is at the table when they are proposing the initiative, making sure that they have all the partners in place that are doing the work, the restoration and conservation work in that proposed geography. And also, we're looking at partnerships that are typically not new, ones that have been in place for some time, that aren't coming together just for a FIP initiative award, that have a extensive performance history and one that is generally positive. So any other questions or anything we need to potentially return to at the end?
Liza Jane.
This is Liza Jane. Could you explain what's intended with the B there, the second part, catalyze additional investments within the initiative geography for me?
Thanks.
And how that might impact rural communities?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, the last part of B, catalyze additional investments within the initiative geography, is essentially what sort of match or leverage the partnership is bringing to the FIP partner, to the partnership or to the award. So what we're looking for is partnerships that can leverage both cash and in-kind investments.
So for rural communities that don't have that potential often, will they be penalized for that, or is there wiggle room?
For the record, Eric Hartstein, the minimum amount of match that we are requiring is 25%. So we found that even in rural communities that there are potential to bring in match through NRCS, the RCPP program. BPA provides match in rural communities. The NRCS has other extensive programs through EQIP that is often targeted at rural communities. So we think that this covers both rural and urban communities that are folks that are coming together in partnerships to apply for the FIP.
Question? One more. This is Meg. Just to follow up on that question, what does it mean for the additional investments to be within the initiative geography? Does that mean the source of the investment has to be within the?
So what we're looking for here is that the additional investments will be spent within the geography, that we're not including match that is then spent somewhere outside the geography.
I see. So the money can come from wherever, but it has to be spent within the area, the target area?
Correct.
Okay.
Other comments?
Okay.
So just to be clear, does that mean, this is made you guys are comfortable enough with this section, we're not going to come back to it at the end? Okay, just wanted to make sure.
This is Liza Jane. I wish that could be worded different. I'm with Meg. It sounds to me like the initiative geography maybe means that it needs to come from your region, that those, and it's not the, I'm not understanding it as the initial match, but that this project needs to be able to generate additional investment from its own area in order to be evaluated as positive.
So let's
So
mark that one to come back to.
Okay.
That's
Thank you. Thank you. Oops. Excuse me.
Okay, so we're going to jump ahead a little to 0080, which is Focused Investment Partnership Initiative Funding Recommendation Process. And so what we have proposed in the rules is a funding recommendation process that is similar to what we're currently using for the FIP process for both implementation proposals and development applications. One area that we've gone sort of back and forth on is in 1B, and the current language reads that the board FIP subcommittee may choose to interview partners of a FIP implementation initiative as part of the recommendation process. Staff now recommends that the board approve changing that language to shall, as the subcommittee interview we feel is an important part of the process, and that if the board chooses not to interview partners, that it would necessitate a change to the rules. So are there questions on this?
This is
Meg.
Meg. Or a waiver, I assume. Could a waiver happen for that?
A waiver could happen to all of these, but it would have to be reported to the board. However, in this case, the board is the action here, and so it would be a little bit funky because you're actually directly involved. So yes, the
because
board
it's a
could
board
tell the staff
subcommittee.
you want to waive it.
Okay.
But we just felt it was important enough that was
Okay.
just a little.
And this is Jan. I just had a question on A. The expert review team, is that the regional review team or a different group of people?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, the expert review team is defined, if we go back to 0020, as team of designated personnel with statewide knowledge and interdisciplinary expertise drawn from agencies represented on the board and other entities as appropriate to evaluate focused investment partnership implementation proposals and development applications. So it may include members of regional review teams. I don't recall if in 2015 any of the folks we had involved were on regional review teams or not. But it's generally folks with expertise that is statewide.
Other comments on this one?
Okay. So moving to 0090, board funding decision. And for the board funding decision, we want to be clear that the maximum award for a biennium is $4 million or $12 million for a full 6-year award. And this was direction that was provided by the board, and staff feel that any changes to either the maximum award or the duration of a FIP implementation initiative should necessitate a change in the rule. So, pause here and see if there's any questions.
Bob?
I agree with that change, but I would then think we might have to go back to 0020 sub 2, which sets out somewhat different.
Yeah, this is Will. I had the same. Most all of this is duplicated up in the definitions except for the 4 years. So it seemed like, for clarity, it would be easiest to have that all defined in one place, either here or the other. I don't have a personal preference, but because otherwise you should just match it, or we should add the 4 million to the other or something to keep everything aligned.
Okay.
Megan, oh, sorry.
For the record, Maida, just one question. So to be clear with what, Will, you just said, we could actually, under sub 2, say, for implementation by a high-performing partnership, period, and then keep that whole language. So you're okay if it's one place or the other. But also you're okay if we put it in both places. Okay?
And I'm okay if it's consistent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Both places.
Yes, both places, adding the 4 million if we put it in both. Okay.
And Meg?
I have a question that probably just reflects my lack of background on this. So if you want, I'll ask it, and if you want to hold it till later, then that's fine. But so when I read this, it looks to me like I'm trying to understand the award on a biennial basis versus 6 years of funding, and that might also. I understand these. It looks, when I read this, it looks to me like these proposals are funded kind of theoretically, and then money gets awarded based on grant applications kind of under the proposals? Is that accurate?
So I think there's two things here. So one is that the board can only fund the initiatives for 2 years at a time. Legislatively.
Okay.
And that each biennium, then a FIP that is awarded will come back to the board and provide a report back to the board on the activities, and then with the legislative budget in place, the board, and with the report provided by the FIPs, that the board can then award it the second and third year funding for that FIP. I think your second question is like, how is that actually spent? So that process is described in 0110, which is once a FIP initiative receives the award for a biennium, they then write project level applications which draw off of that amount.
So is it accurate to say that the commitment can't be for more than 2 years, but the intention is longer? Okay. All right.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm just clarifying for my own lack of background. Thank you.
That's the struggle.
Okay.
Jason?
Jason Robinson for the record. So just a quick question in terms of process. So as we look at funding in whole or in part, can mean a lot of different things. Is that coming from a staff recommended funding level, or are we going to have some scale of in part? So just maybe some clarification on that. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be changed here, but just as a comment, how we fund things on a scalable basis.
Yeah. So for the record, Eric Hartstein, the in part could be either a staff recommendation, or as what occurred in the original set of FIPs is that the board actually came through and said we wanted to include, have 6 implementation FIPs, so we needed to do some adjustments within those budgets to make it so that it could award six FIPs.
Randy? And then Bob.
For the record, Randy Labby. Eric, the first round we had, I recall that the board in the funding segment tried to manipulate the awards so that another FIP could be authorized. And that failed, but it passed. That passed, yeah. And as it turned out, some of the FIPs, as I recall, were not sufficiently along the continuum to their completion to use all the funds in the first several years. And I just wondered what is behind the limit of $4 million in this, and whether that is going to inhibit the flexibility of funding under certain circumstances.
Do we want to hold that one? Why don't we, because that's a little bit longer conversation, why don't we mark that one down?
Okay.
Bob?
I was just going to point out to the new members that when they make their FIP application, they actually set forth what they think the second biennium and the third biennium are going to be, and some of them go down, some of them go up. And we're not committed to that, but we actually could see where, where it was headed.
Okay.
Other comments on this section?
Okay, so we're going to move ahead to 0100, which is the Focused Investment Partnership Implementation Initiative Partnership Agreement. And so the partnership agreements are a tool that is currently used by OWEB with FIP implementation initiatives. And the agreements are signed by core partners of the board-awarded implementation initiatives and include basic information about the initiative, including the process for submitting the project-level applications, which includes the review process and how partners will address any changes into the composition of the core partnership. And I'd like to focus now on subsection 3 and 4. And so number 3, only organizations that are signatory to the partnership agreement are eligible to apply for project-level grants. So what that means is that if you are not a core partner in a FIP, that you are not eligible to apply for project-level grants through the FIP. And number 4 is projects in the defined geographic area of the initiative and focused on the programs and actions identified in the initiative's proposal are ineligible for OWEB restoration, stakeholder engagement, monitoring, technical assistance, land acquisition, and water lease and transfer grants that are offered outside of the Focused Investment Partnership Program. So what this means is that partners cannot apply for both projects within a FIP and then turn around and also apply for those same projects in the open solicitation program. What that also implies is that entities that are not part of the FIP cannot apply for projects within the geographic area of the FIP that are seeking to implement actions and getting at the ecological outcomes that are described in the FIP initiative. So I just want to make that clear. And this is currently how the program is being operated.
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, just to clarify, I'm gonna give an example that I think will clarify, because there's a lot in here. So I'm gonna give an example of the bad scenario. So in one scenario, you have a focus investment partnership. They have figured out everything that they're gonna do. We have vetted them. This is a super high vetting level. And another partner comes in and says, I want some of that. And so I want to apply through the FIP for my own project. But the partners have already built a budget and built a program. And so somebody else coming in with an application really messes with the partnership that we've just approved. So that one actually is kind of easy. You've got a partnership, you've got the funding. The second side, if I was a very savvy focus investment partnership and the second part wasn't here, what I would do is say, hey, Jason, Randy and I are going to be the FIP. And we're working with you, but we're going to keep you out of the FIP, and you're going to apply through open solicitation. So Randy and I get $4 million, and Jason's going to keep applying for grants through open solicitation. And that effectively takes that FIP from a $4 million FIP up to a $5 or $6 million FIP. So that's what the second piece is trying to do. It is a place where if there was an extenuating circumstance, which is why Eric raised that waiver of rules, there may be a circumstance we just can't foresee where this partnership and that separation makes sense. In that case, we would propose that we would waive it and come immediately to you and say, hey, here's this funky thing happened, and we really think that we're actually doing the tribes a disservice in this case. But for the core of it, that's what it's trying to do, is avoid those two circumstances.
This is Will. I have I'm not sure that I got more clarity, actually. So in 3, only organizations that are signatory to the partnership agreement are eligible to apply for project-level grants. By project-level grants, you mean grants outside of the FIP
No, anything
program?
inside the FIP. The project
Okay.
level grant
Is the sub-pieces within? Okay, that's perfect. I understand that. And then projects in the defined geographic area of the initiative and focused on the programs. So that's again with projects that are defined within the FIP can't also apply outside the FIP and double dip, if you will. Right. Okay. Jan Lee.
This is Jan. I have a question just to see how this works. So in the lower Willamette, for example, if there's a FIP in place and there becomes an opportunity for a land acquisition of some sort in program,
if they were within the geography doing the same action. So if it was a water-related FIP and they were doing an oak acquisition, absolutely. But if that in that identified geography, no, they would have to come through a partner in the FIP.
Thank you.
Meg and then Bob. And Gary.
It's Gary. So does this, number 3 there, leave any room for adding a partner at some point in the, I mean, does this mean signatory at the beginning of the FIP, original FIP transaction? Or does this mean, or is there room to add a partner, you know, at second biennium or something like that?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, in the partnership agreement, we will have a methodology for the partners to describe a process where they may choose to add core partners to their initiative.
And that's identified in sub 2, the last sentence of sub 2.
Meg and then Bob.
Meg Reeves. I'm wondering about so we are listing the types of grants for which members cannot apply in sub 4. And are there, I'm not familiar enough again with the whole panoply, but are there grants for which they could apply that aren't listed here? Or are we really just saying you can't apply for any grants that OWEB administers?
So one that comes immediately to mind are small grants.
Okay, all right. It was just a...
And CREP
Okay,
TA,
thank you.
Forest Collaborative, council capacity. Thank you, Courtney.
Bob?
Well, and then the bottom line is that based on 0140, Maida can make them all go away. Yeah, so.
Slight feeling of power.
But then report it to the board at the next board meeting.
Yes.
Other comments on this section? Okay. Oh, Randy?
It's Randy Labby. With Bob leaving and having lost Dan Thorndike, it's nice to see we have a new legal beagle on board.
Trying to restrain my impulses.
This is Bob. I talked to her before the meeting started today.
Okay.
Okay, so moving to 0110, Focus Investment Partnership Implementation Initiative Project Level Grant Process. So I'd like to focus attention here is around the match component, which talked a little bit about earlier. Rules for the OWEB grant program stipulate that 25% match must be sought at the time of application and then secured before the funds are released. And what we're seeking to do with the FIP implementation initiative partners is a little bit different in that we want to have the ability to report that 25% match for the partnership at the initiative level rather than at the project level. So reporting 25% of the whole amount rather than 25% of each individual discrete project. So we feel that this provides flexibility to partnerships and reduces some of the paperwork for initiatives that have secured other large sources of funding, be it RCPP, BPA, Two Chiefs Initiative, et cetera, in order to report this match as secured at just one point of time in the biennium rather than divvying it up as match to specific projects, individual projects. However, OWEB is statutorily mandated to require some match for each application. So essentially what we're proposing in subsection 3 here is that each project level application that's coming through the FIP implementation initiative have some match, and then that match is then noted as secured in subsection 7 prior to any fund disbursement, but that the 25% match requirement is achieved at the initiative level and then reported to the board on a biennial basis. So stop and see if that's clear.
This is Will. That seems like it makes sense at the aggregate level, but you have so there's the biennial level 25% match at the initiative level, but each project, the first project in the biennium, how does that work?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, each application that comes in for a project level application must list some amount of match. It does not need to equal 25%.
As long as at the end of the biennium, in aggregate, there's 25%. If one project was 75% match and another one wants 10%, for example.
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, they will have to show that it is secured at the beginning of the biennium. So let me give,
Okay.
I'll give one quick
Right,
example.
right.
Opal Springs, which is on my mind because we were just talking about it. It may be providing, it's a $8 million project. We are investing $1.5 million in that project. They have well met their match requirements for that initiative. They may have an acquisition that comes later, or a restoration project where they might only have 10% match, but they've shown at the beginning of the biennium that they easily matched and exceeded that 25% level. Another example would be in sage grouse, where you've got 5 partners, and some of them are doing management plans, and NRCS is paying, and some were doing management plans and paying for, but at that initiative level, there's no question that across those, that 25% match is being met. It has to be shown as secured.
Meg?
So the initiative level means the whole, what's proposed for the whole biennium? And so you'd have to, the project applicant would have to demonstrate that that 25% match had been secured before you can apply for project level applications? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Just clarifying.
So is this something we came up with, or project partners asked for to be different, or?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, this was something that we've heard from project partners that, specifically those that have secured the large landscape scale grants, where they have a grant agreement in place that they say they could just demonstrate that 25% match has been secured for the entire biennium, and it'd be very helpful to reduce some of the paperwork.
This is Maida for the record. I would say at least half of ours, so like the sage grouse one has RCPP that is well exceeds our contribution. The Willamette with Meyer Memorial Trust and Bonneville Power. So we are seeing this in a number of cases where it's unquestionable that they've got it, but project by project it just gets really funky because that's not how they're incorporating, but we're really well leveraged.
Rosemary? Sorry. Thank you.
Rosemary Furphy for the record. So earlier on this topic of securing the match, so in 0050, it says demonstrate that 25% match is sought. So yes, they're looking for it. And then later in 0110, they have to have some match, but we don't actually here say when. I understand what you're saying about we know that they've got money and they've got all these things coming in, but we seem to be so specific in some areas, and then this seems to be.
Yes.
It is
fluid.
actually stated before the first distribution of funds. They have to have it secured before we give them $1.
Okay, is that somewhere?
Right here, prior
Number
to
7.
disbursement.
And I'll also, for the record, Eric Hartstein, point out that Rosemary, what you're referring to in 0050, the 2 subsection B is for FIP development initiative grants. So that's the Courtney's program, where it's one grant that's being issued to a partnership through the development program.
Gary?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Gary, just a comment. I mean, if this 25% is clearly defined, secured before the initial number one project is, approved, then, I mean, I'm not sure that I see a value in having the word some in there, and I don't see how that, some could mean 0.05% or some such thing like that, and it seems to me it either has to be more clearly defined or maybe not used at all at the project level. That's what I'm saying.
So actually, for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, that is they will be doing exactly what you just said. So at the initiative level, it's 25%. For a project, it could be $200. But the initiative, so that's why some actually does matter. It could be 0.1% for a project. It won't, let me just say to be clear. It won't be typically 0.1%. But at that project, it could be a very small level of match, but the initiative is hitting the 25%. So that's why the word sum is used. They have to indicate there is match, but we're not prescribing an amount per project. We are prescribing an amount for the initiative.
This is Will. So the, sorry, we're having trouble with this, but so 7, prior to disbursement of board funds, the grantee must provide proof that the matching contribution has been secured. Is that the matching contribution at the initiative level?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I guess that would help because it's, then it says the 25% match requirement will be reported at the initiative level. Feels like something that's reported at the end, totaled up at the end as opposed to the proof at the beginning.
So I think it
has
just
been
needs the
obtained.
addition of the word, the grantee must provide proof that the initiative matching contribution has been secured.
Okay.
Okay.
More questions or comments on this level, this section? Okay.
Okay, so you've identified a few other areas that we need to return to now, but I also want to open up for discussion any other rules that we didn't touch on here this morning that you think require attention that we can now go through.
Jason?
Jason Robinson. So quick question, since there's been a little bit of confusion on initiative level versus project level, would it be pertinent to include those as definitions in the rules, or are they included? I didn't see them, but.
There. Definitions number 4 says, defines initiative.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, I just read over it.
It does not define project level.
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, we felt that the Section 0110, which is the Focused Investment Partnership Implementation Initiative project level grant process, that the definitions are really provided in that set of rules.
So is this the time to raise questions about the purpose or definitions that
Yes.
we had left for later? This is Will. So it actually comes up in a couple places, but the definition of initiative, let me start there, I guess. Number 4 in definitions. Initiative means the program that the partnership will pursue with focused investment partnership funding for up to 6 years. So the for up to 6 years seems redundant because that's actually defined elsewhere. It's, but the bigger question I had is, with that definition of initiative, in purpose, the board shall provide grants as funds are available for focused investment partnerships initiatives through either the implementation grants or development grants. I think that the initiatives is not appropriate there because initiatives down below says the focused investment funding for up to 6 years refers to, therefore, to a program and not development. So if the initiative refers to the development, we should take out the 6 years so that it does not imply the program, the development. Okay, so then we can leave, then the purpose is okay to say it refer to initiatives through either implementation or development. Okay.
That's a good catch.
Yeah. So for the record, Eric Hartstein, so the correction now reads, in definitions, sub 4, initiative means the program that the partnership will pursue with focused investment partnership funding, period.
Period. And that way it can be either implementation or development. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess, I'm just wondering whether the use of initiative all over the rest of the place.
We did. So our intent in the use of initiative, for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, our intent in the use of initiative was exactly what you described, that it is for both
be either-
development
either one.
and implementation. So this is the space that we
Okay.
missed.
And for the record, Eric Hartstein, since we're on the definitions section, I did note in a previous discussion item that subsection 2, which is the definition of focused investment partnership implementation, which means an initiative with an existing strategic action plan that is ready for implementation by a high-performing partnership, and currently reads, for a period of up to 6 years and not exceeding 12 million, that we may want to strike that last sentence beginning with 4, because it's the redundancy or the inconsistency with 0090, the board funding decision, as was noted earlier.
So did you say you're proposing to delete, put a period?
Proposing to delete, putting a period
Period
at
after
the end of partnership. And then deleting for a period of up to 6 years and not exceeding 12 million.
You have just a question on definition number 12 on grant types. It says grant types for focused investment implementation initiatives. Aren't they just grant types, and eliminate those words?
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, that actually is specific to the implementation initiatives. The development initiatives don't use those grant types. So it is specific to the implementation initiatives. Was that your question? Sorry.
Yeah, if they are, okay.
Yes.
Gary?
Ms. Gary, I'd just like to suggest we change places with 2 and 3 because development comes before implementation in most processes.
Okay, for the record, Eric Hartstein, so we will switch development with implementation in the definitions.
I'm wondering, with respect to the definition of grant types, I don't know whether that term gets used anywhere in the rules, and I'm wondering if that really should be an operative provision rather than a definition.
They use grants, but not grant.
Because I think the intent is to say these are under these rules, these are the types of grants for which these implementation initiatives are eligible to apply, and that sounds more operative than definitional to me. But maybe I might have missed a place where you say that these are the grant types are what implementation initiatives can apply for. Right, we say.
I would have to do a search, but I don't remember grant types, but I do remember grants being referred to somewhere.
So for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, Meg, what I hear you proposing, I just want to make sure this is correct, is that you would just take number 12 and you would put it under its own section. So it might be like a 0030, move and say the grant types that are eligible for focused investment implementation are.
Or it even could go maybe under 1110, I don't know, but yeah, I would put it in the operative part of the rules rather than in the definitions.
Oh, and did you say under 0?
I was thinking 1110 maybe, because it talks about project level grants for implementation.
With the board's okay, would you be comfortable moving the definition of grant types, making it not a definition anymore and putting it under 0110, which is the project level grant process?
Sounds good to me. That was Will, right?
And for the record, really quick, while we're still looking through, Bob Weber just suggested on the side that what we do when we get through these last pieces is that we take a break. We'll pull up the rule and just do a quick track change so that when you guys do approve
Okay.
It's a clean bill.
This is Jan. I have a question. If that language is already in 0100 as sub 4, duplicating it in 0110, is that necessary? We should probably have it in one place.
Oh, that's the ineligible. Which are the same.
Right, that's right.
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, so what we could do, I think what Jan is noting is a redundancy. If we move this to 0110, you could say projects under sub 4 above are ineligible for the OWEB restoration grants identified in 0110. And then that reference gets, it's not there twice, it's just there once. Want to go back to the other ones, Eric?
So for the record, Eric Hartstein suggests moving to 0030, where I have a note that Bob had a concern or an issue.
This is Bob. What I was concerned about is it says every 5 years the board shall approve, and I'm thinking maybe we say at least every 5 years to give us a little more flexibility.
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, the only thing I'll note here, I think, so for board decision, I think either way is fine. The 5 years that were placed in here was when the board approved in 2015. That was what you approved along with it. And part of the reason is the concern that grantees would get whiplash a little bit if every biennium there's a new set of priorities. However, Member Weber's comment could still let you be out at 5 years. So I think you guys can go either way. I just wanted to give you how we got to that place to begin with, and I think for us either one is fine.
This is Will. I actually like that idea that shall at least every 5 years, and we can have a policy that we're only doing it every 5 years, as opposed to having forced in rules. We couldn't do it year 3 because some interesting thing arose. And more comments on that? I had a minor thing. I could go either way. And under oops, I'm sorry. That's the next one.
Okay. So I think we can go. Is it eligibility, Will, that you had a minor?
Yeah, so B in both. It seemed to me it should be future tense is to be implemented because we're in the process of evaluating proposals that addresses a board identified significance and is to be implemented by a higher performing partnership, since we haven't approved them yet.
Okay, noted.
More comments on this one? Oh, Rosemary?
Rosemary Furphy for the record. So under the waiver and periodic review of rules, we were going to report it to the board at least on an annual basis. Did we say that would be every board meeting?
Where's the next board?
At the next board meeting. Good.
So I'd like to move ahead to 0060, the evaluation criteria. Had a note that Stephen had a concern.
Which one was that again?
0060, evaluation criteria. I believe it was around subsection C.
Yeah, you answered.
You answered that? Okay.
We did have another, sorry, Eric Williams for the record. Liza Jane had requested some clarification on this one. To clarify, and let me know if this is correct, Liza Jane, that this doesn't imply that the actual investment must come from within the specific FIP geography, but that the investment is for activities that take place within the FIP geography.
Does that work for you to use the word for activities?
And for the record, Eric Williams. So this is number 0060, subsection 1B. It currently says the capacity to partner, engage the community, and catalyze additional investments within the initiative geography. And so the proposed change would be the capacity to partner, engage the community, and catalyze additional investments applied to activities within the initiative geography.
I have a question again about the use of initiative. So focused investment partnership implementation initiative proposals shall be evaluated on that. The initiative seems redundant since the definition says a focused investment partnership implementation means an initiative. So I think we can just delete initiative there, and the same in number 2.
Noted.
Other comments on this section?
So the next section that I have noted a concern was 0090 on page 4, board funding decision. Randy had a question about the $4 million maximum. Yeah.
For the record, Randy Levy. I just wanted to understand what's behind this. My only concern was that we don't have anything that limits our options to adjust to funding.
So for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, I think I can speak a little bit to this one. We do have some initiatives that if you opened that up would apply to you for 10 to 12 million in a biennium and would take the entire grant. So the maximum was for that, to say, OWEB's going to be in, but we're in for a maximum of 4 million. It does, the reason, so I think what Chair Labby was raising is in the last, with the first 6, not all of them spent their money in the first biennium, but with the first 6, we didn't start them until 6 months into the biennium, and then the initiative actual work took another 3 or 4 months. So my recommendation is that this first biennium of the first FIPS is not likely indicative, that we really put them behind the 8 ball by between 6 and 9 months this first time. I think that what we're seeing with this second biennium, with nearly all of them, is well spent. So my recommendation from the staff's perspective is, I think until you decide to change it to a higher or lower number, having a cap is really important because it helps you not just have one really huge initiative or have to tell them no and bring it back down to the 4 million level.
Randy Levy, I'm okay with that.
Other comments on this section? Okay.
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, I think that concludes the areas that we wanted to return to. We've noted the suggested edits and can make those in a track changes document.
Right.
Liza Jane.
Oh.
Liza Jane, I need a little help getting comfortable with this section, specifically 3 and 4.
Oh, yeah. We're done.
I'm done.
She's getting unruly.
Thank you, Laura.
So important, it broke the mic.
Which section are you
3 and 4
3 and 4
of 0100. Yeah, I'll just keep going around the table.
Oh, the 3 and 4 of 01.
Correct. Yeah. Yep. So does this mean that if there's a watershed council in an area and they're not part of this initiative, then they can not apply for anything but a small grant?
For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, no, that is not correct. They could apply for projects that are not specific to this initiative. So if you have a watershed council and they are working on oak projects and the initiative is an anadromous fish project, they're set, they're fine, everything's good. If you have a land trust that is doing upland work or something tied to sage grouse and the initiative is water related, they're fine. The goal is within that initiative, if you have a watershed council that is doing the exact same stuff in the exact same area, they ought to be part of the initiative.
Thank you. I understand now.
Meg?
I feel like this might be beating a dead horse, but coming back to the 25% match requirement in 0110 sub 7, I wonder if we could, I would like to see it stated more clearly that this 25% match is a requirement, that there cannot be a grant or an award without the match. So I think one way to address that would be to just flip those two sentences and say, prior to disbursement of board funds, the grantee must provide proof that the required 25% matching contribution has been secured. And then the next one could just be, notwithstanding that other rule, the match requirements will be reported at the initiative level. So it's really just putting the 25% in the first sentence, I think.
That works.
And we also added the word, this is Maida, we also added the word initiative. So provide proof that the initiatives required 25%. And could you repeat the rest of that sentence?
Just that the initiatives required 25% matching contribution has been secured. Yeah.
Rosemary?
Question under 0090, number 2, where we talk about the focused investment partnership development initiatives, may fund initiative in whole or part. Above in number 1, we talk about the amounts of money. Do we want to say anything about them? Does it leave a question about, well, how much is available? And
for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, the board has never set an amount for those. So we have, yeah, but that's the spending plan. Right. For the whole program. So we did not put one in here. You have not established one in the past, and we don't for most of our other grant programs. So if the board would choose in the future to establish an amount, we can we could then place it into rule for you, but we didn't have an indication from you at this point.
All right, so I think we're at break time, and then we'll come back after break to do the approval of this. Does that match everybody's? Randy?
Yeah, for the record, Randy Labby, after the rulemaking board action, we're going to be taking up item 9, tab 9, tab N, Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. It includes a public comment period, so if you're desiring to comment in that period, please see Derek Barnes for a yellow slip.
So we'll meet back here at 10 o'clock, 15-minute break. Thank you. Break if you can have your seats.
This is Randy Labby for the record. Before we get started on tab N, Jason has an announcement.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Jason Robinson for the record. I wanted to announce the presence of Margaret Corvey, who is the Natural Resource Director for the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla Indians. And I wanted to thank her and her tribe for the opportunity to participate in this meeting within a portion of their ancestral homelands. So thank you very much, Margaret, and thank you to the Coos tribe, Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla for this opportunity. I also wanted to point out that there are some stickers that they have provided as well, and they were also at the reception last night. So thank you very much, Margaret, for your participation.
Thank you. Randy Labby for the record. About a year ago, I would never have expected we'd be here today to take action on the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, and there's just a lot of people that need to be thanked for that, and I'm not in a position to know all those people. I know that Kelly Beamer, who's here, walked the aisles and the hallways of the Capitol, and the staff, the OWEB staff has just worked miracles to bring as much together in a short period of time where we can take action today if Bob cooperates. So,
What's it going to be, Bob?
Bob's going to make the honorary motion for this item. Maida, thank you. So you direct us through this?
Thank you. For the record, Maida Lofsgarden, Executive Director. And I want to extend a piece of thanks before I start to the last conversation about rulemaking, both to the staff who are, some of them are back in the room, some of them are frantically making copies. But that was a really, really excellent conversation. I appreciate both the new board members and the existing board members and your participation in that. So thank you for your thoughtful feedback there. And as Chair Labby said, this I am nearly as amazed as he is that we are here today. The program that I'm going to be talking to you about, I'll give a little bit more background for the new board members, was something that we thought had no life in the 2015 legislative session. A key group of organizations, including Coalition of Land Trusts, conservation districts, Sustainable Northwest, the Nature Conservancy, the Farm Bureau, and the Cattlemen, all came together and built a program. And when it was not funded in the governor's budget, those same organizations went and really worked hard to get this program passed in a legislative session with a very large deficit. It shows the importance of agriculture and working lands to this state. So we are excited. We have been running full steam ahead since the bill passed and legislative session ended in July. I'm going to walk through just a little bit of background about the program and a reminder for those of you who already know about it, and then an update for those who are new. And the action in front of you today is to approve a brand new commission. The OWEB board has never done this. This is brand new. You are assisted by many other boards and commissions in this effort. So you are not selecting these members alone. There's been a lot of work that has been done to get us to this place. I'll walk you through that as well. And we do have both Laura Masterson and Bob Weber were at their various commission meetings when they approved commission members. So you can also refer to them if you have any questions. So in your book under attachment under agenda item N, there is a full staff report. What I'm going to do is walk through a PowerPoint presentation and again give you some background and timeline. So as a reminder, the purpose of the Agricultural Heritage Program is voluntary tools to keep lands in farming and ranching. And the thought around the importance of working lands, a large percentage, as we all know, of our state is federal and state-owned lands, but a significantly large proportion of our state is privately owned, both farms and forest lands. While this program is focused on farm and ranch lands, open spaces provide a lot more value, farm and ranch lands, to the economy, to rural communities, and to healthy fish and wildlife populations. The vast majority of the work that we do at OWEB is on private lands, and we wouldn't be where we are today without private landowners. But even though Oregon has incredibly strong land use laws, if we are not careful, There are other uses that still fall within Oregon's land use laws for conversion, and we are already seeing that in this state. We are lucky to have the strong agriculture economy that we have, and we want to make sure to maintain that also for fish and wildlife and other natural resource benefits. Second largest economic driver in the state, $5.4 billion. They again support valuable fish and wildlife habitat. They are the cornerstone of the state's rural economies, both timber and agricultural lands. And what we have found is, while we were way ahead of the game in Oregon with our land use laws, I think there were some things that we turned a blind eye to in terms of making sure that those lands really are protected in agricultural production. The goals of the program: keep the lands in production, support fish, wildlife, and other natural resource values. This was critical to the work group. This is a co-balancing effort. The Measure 76 funding that we and you all invest is focused specifically on native fish and wildlife habitat and water quality. And so what you see in our programs, which I support 100%, are similar to the things that we saw yesterday, where you might be purchasing a farmland and you're turning it fully back to restored habitat. And that is absolutely critical in the state of Oregon. We have so many fish and wildlife resources. This program seeks to have a balanced dual goal. So this program, a project like we saw yesterday, would not be eligible, but a property that is a working ranch that is also supporting sage grouse habitat would be eligible. So that's a little bit of the distinction between the two programs and the focus. The goal is to look at some new and flexible approaches that are tailored to landowners, balancing landowner conservation needs, and then leveraging federal dollars, particularly from NRCS, that we have not tapped in Oregon because we don't have a program like this. We have attempted, and we have a couple of projects in our acquisition program right now that are matching up with NRCS's programs, but it is not easy to match Measure 76 programs with working land easement programs. And this really fills a void that we have not had in Oregon. And I think bluntly it's because we thought our land use laws covered us. So many states had to go down this path 20, 30 years ago because their farmlands were not protected in the same way. We're just coming to the table now with this program. The statute has 4 components. Succession planning, we learned during our listening sessions and other conversations that succession planning was critically important. So that's not something that OWEB typically does, but it is something that this new commission will work and focus on. Permanent working land, conservation easements, and term covenants. So OWEB does conservation easements right now, along with fee title purchases. These are focused specifically on working lands. The construct is the same. It's still a conservation easement. There's an underlying construct, but these are focused on working lands. Conservation management plans, which I mentioned yesterday in response to a question from Will about what are some new and innovative approaches on working lands. Conservation planning has been in place since the Dust Bowl, but the ability to actually reimburse a landowner for implementation of their conservation plan is fairly new. And then technical support. There's another component outside of this. The Legislative Policy Research Office will be studying tax-related and other financial barriers to farm and ranch land transfer, but that sits actually outside of the commission itself. So a reminder, and I've shown this to the board members before about the timeline. We have been able to check the first 2 boxes after approval of the program. We hired staff. Nellie McAdams is not able to be here today because she is at the National Association of Conservation Districts meeting, along with Ron Alvarado from NRCS and others. So she regrets very much that she's not able to be here, but had a conflict. She has been on board since this fall, and even at halftime, I'm fairly certain she works 100 hours a week. She is phenomenal. You will get to know her over time as we're coming back and reporting to you, and has just been invaluable to the program. We also have brought on an additional temporary staff, Jim Fox, who used to work with the Recreation Conservation Office in Washington, which is our counterpart, and helped start up their working lands program there. He retired to Bend and is providing us services, and along with an intern. We are right in the process of the commission and RAC selection. We have completed the first part of the statutory process, and as you note in the third bullet, it is now time for the OWEB board to approve the commission. The initial commission RAC meeting will be tomorrow, so we are hitting the ground running. Between March and August, we will be developing rules. That is the first responsibility of this commission and really the most important. There is no funding for program implementation right now for the grants or easements. And so what we have is a limited space and an opportunity to really intensively develop rules. If you think about the process you use just for one rulemaking today, they are developing all of the rules for all of the programs between now and March. So they will be in full day session. They are the Rules Advisory Commission or Committee because you will approve the rules. That's one of the things established in statute is they are the recommending entity, you are the approving entity. The same will be the case when they actually have grants. They will be the recommending entity. They will have technical committees just like you do. They will have review teams just like you do. They will have extensive processes in place. It will come to them. They will make a final recommendation, and then that will come to the OWEB board for final approval. So this commission is nested within OWEB, in part because OWEB has been running grant programs for 20 years, and there was a trust that that using OWEB as the umbrella, we would follow the same processes and approaches, although it is a different set of criteria. We would follow the same processes, procedures, and approaches and bring those projects to you. We'll have public comment, and then we are planning to develop, we don't have an official name for it, but some kind of pre-application. Again, we have no money, but the hope is to be able to bring to the next legislative session an understanding of what the demand really is out there, so that when they're making their decisions, they can understand where these landowners are and what that interest is and what the dollar amount is. Between September and February, we will then solicit those pre-applications. You will vote on the rules in October, and then the session starts next February. So I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions about the timeline before I step into the role of the board. Okay.
No questions.
We have many questions, but we're just going to write it as we go. So this is a quick ride for us, but we are very excited to get started. So your role, I just mentioned this a minute ago, again, you will be today approving commission members. You are providing a liaison to the commission. That was the other piece that was written in statute, that one ex officio member from the OWEB board sits on the commission. That gives you the ability to understand and to get feedback from that member about the process. In addition, we are lucky to have actually two members with a very strong interest in this program. So I'm just going to mention that Laura Masterson, who, as you know, also sits on the Board of Agriculture, Department of Agriculture, has a very strong interest in this program. She will be sitting on, I think, all of the technical committees, which gives you, during this rulemaking process, a second person. And so we're excited that we have interest, and you'll have some extra eyes and ears on the process. And again, you'll approve the projects and programs that are recommended for funding. So I'm going to stop there, and before I go to the commission membership, I am just going to note that attachment A to the staff report, I just pulled the sections of the statute that apply to you all. So section 7 is the makeup of the commission. That's here in front of you on the screen. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But it says that those members are appointed by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So that's the first reference to your role. And then it goes through the commission members. And then if you go to section 9, which is the top of the second page of the report, page 6 of the bill, it talks about the rulemaking, both in section 9 and in section 10. That talks about rulemaking, and it talks about their process and policies and priorities. If you go to section 12, just by way of information, it also talks about the terms of the members. And the reason that matters is they set up staggered terms in the statute for the first terms of all of these members so that we don't have 4 years from now everybody turns over and we have a brand new commission. So the staggered terms are only for the first go round, but you'll see in our recommendation, you'll see those staggered terms actually referenced. So before I jump into commission membership, any questions about your role or the pieces of statute?
Wow, this is like the bipartisan
It
state
is.
legislature.
It is. For those of you who've been here for a while, you're probably sick of hearing about it and just want to see it get going. So the commission membership, I will tell you, and again, this is on section, again, in the section 7 of the statute. This is the part that the work group spent more time on than anything else, because they understand, just like we see with the OWEB board, that if you get the balance right of who is recommending projects, of who is approving the rules, then you're going to have good rules and you're going to have good projects. That, I think, is reflected in this board. There is no board in the state that has a makeup of the OWEB board. And because of that, people trust in the results that come out of you and the technical committees. So the commission, the work group and the legislature spent quite a bit of time with this. You'll see there are 4 recommended from the Board of Agriculture that are actively engaged in farming and ranching. Not only that, they have to be diverse commodities and geography. So when we talk about the process that the Board of Agriculture went through with the applicants that they had in hand, it's tough to get to that mix of geography and diverse commodities and actively engaged in farming and ranching. The Board of Agriculture also has 1 appointment of somebody with expertise in agriculture water quality. The Fish and Wildlife Commission has 2 with expertise in fish and wildlife habitat. Land Conservation and Development Commission, who is not represented on our board, has an individual with expertise in conservation easements. So we wanted somebody who actually understood the transaction process in a little bit more detail. OWEB has 2, and then an ex officio. So 1 representing natural resource values interests, that is a little bit broader statement. 1 representing tribal interests. OSU Extension has 1 representing extension. And then in addition, as I talked about before, the OWEB board has an ex officio member who is a liaison between our board and this commission. We figured it was about time, since we have a lot of other boards who give us commission members, we should probably give a commission member to somebody else. So questions about the general makeup? All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, and you'll see on Attachment B and Attachment C. Attachment B are the ones that we are recommending to you today. Attachment C, we took a bit different approach. So typically with board and commission appointments that are Senate approved, governor recommended, Senate approved, people just apply in. So they'll submit an application into the governor's office, or we will go out and do recruitment of people that we know who are really good. We also announce all of our commission appointments through a group that's called our Natural Resource Stakeholders Group. That, I think at the last meeting there were probably 50 or 60 folks there. So typically when an OWEB board position comes open, for example, we ship that out to those 50 to 60 groups and say, hey, this appointment's coming up. If you know of anybody, send it in to us. So the process is formal in that you have to submit an application and it's vetted and reviewed. But we don't have an open application timeline and process. Because of the quick turnaround for this commission and because of the interest legislatively and with our different groups, we actually did a full solicitation for positions. So we sent out through Farm Bureau and the Cattlemen and the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Coalition of Land Trusts and the Nature Conservancy and everyone else. We said, here's the application. We posted it to our website. We sent out announcements about it. And we got, as you can see here, an extensive list of folks who applied to the program. This made it, I think, easier and harder for the commissions who are recommending people to you easier because they didn't have to go running out to try to solicit folks, but harder because we got really good people that applied. So we just wanted you to note, and again, that's attachment C. If there is 1 star by them, they are the ones who are recommended in that category. If there are 2 stars by them, they were recommended in another category, so people could apply in multiple categories. And then we have 1 person, again, Jim Fox, who applied, and his expertise was so outstanding, we asked if we could just pay him instead and bring him on to staff. So, questions about the solicitation process before I get into the recommendation process? Okay. So each board and commission then had to recommend to you all who they would put. And for folks like the Board of Agriculture, who is typically an advisory board, I think this may have been one of the first times they were making a formal official vote. Is that correct, Laura? That was kind of final decision. They spent a lot of time working through this process. And I don't know, I would stop and see if Bob or Laura want to provide any comment from your commissions about either your process or.
Laura Masterson. I think it was challenging, but it was also great to have such a strong applicant pool. And so we focused on the geographic diversity and the diversity of commodities. And it had some really, what's Courtney's language again?
Robust.
Robust conversations about it. But I think in the end, everyone, not everyone on the board got all of their top candidates, but everyone on the board was really satisfied with the slate of people that we're recommending. So I think that, to me, was success.
Mm-hmm. And I would say for the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and I'll let Bob comment, the Fish and Wildlife Commission had staff recommendations that came to them and then had discussion around those. So, Bob?
Yeah, Bob Weber. We appoint people to boards and commissions all the time, so it was pretty routine in that sense. But we also acknowledge that we had a great pool of applicants to choose from. And I think I probably knew more of them through my OWEB connections than most of the members on the commission. And I think I felt very, very comfortable with our selections.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then, of course, our other Department of Land Conservation and Development is not represented on this board. They did a similar process of staff recommendation and then a commission approval. So the attachment B shows the list of folks. They're here. I'll just provide a little bit of additional background. So Ken Bailey, in addition to running a fairly large orchard over in the Dalles, is also with the Conservation District Board and has been for many years. Chad Allen, in addition to having a dairy in Tillamook, is the president of the Tillamook Creamery Association, member of the Farm Bureau, and they've been doing a strong push over time on confined animal feeding operation related work and work in that area. Doug Kramer, you all know, used to serve on the OWEB board, also served on the Board of Agriculture, is with the Conservation District and is in St. Paul, but operates his blueberry farms up and down the Willamette Valley. Woody Wolf is a rancher over in Wallowa who actually has a conservation easement on his property and has been very involved in conservation work in his area. The Board of Agriculture also had the water quality position. Some of you may remember Lois Loop is a rancher west of Salem, but for many, many years, she ran the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program for the Farm Service Agency. So she and Ken Beerley, who used to work for OWEB, actually wrote the CREP program, which is all tied to water quality in the state and is really kind of the type of program that we picture here in a number of areas. Fish and Wildlife Commission, Mary Wall, it notes that she's Watershed Services in Portland. They also have a family ranch down on the south coast on the Elk River, sixes, I always forget which one of them. Elk River. And they were actually recognized, the family, as one of the national conservation landowners by NRCS, and have long been conservation landowners, and she has a strong environmental background. Bruce Taylor used to be a groupie at OWEB board meetings until he went half-time with the joint ventures. He's worked with Defenders of Wildlife, Intermountain Habitat Joint Venture, Oregon Habitat Joint Venture, and one more of the joint ventures, highly involved in bird conservation work. Derek Johnson has been, ever since I've been around, and longer, Derek Johnson has been leading the conservation easement work with the Nature Conservancy out of Portland. So then I'm going to, and then I'm going to jump down to the extension one and then come back to the OWEB positions. For OSU Extension, the recommendation from them was Dr. Anjima, I think is how you, Anjima, who is joining from OSU Extension in Corvallis. So let me talk a little bit about the three. So those are the ones that were recommended by others. I'll talk a little bit about how we came to our conclusions on the three that are recommended by you today, because you'll be the first board to hear and approve them. The first was tribal interests. As you'll note in the list, we did have a number of folks who applied with tribal interests. Of those, three of them, Nathan Jackson, Amy Charette, and Stan Van de Wettering, all work for tribes, for various tribes. We had some conversations. Thank you, Jason. We did some consultation with Jason. Nathan Jackson actually is a member of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians. He is a rancher. He runs the Cow Creek Ranch, and he's also the incoming president for the Oregon Cattlemen's Association. So we found that to be a really neat and interesting mix. And we talked to the other two individuals, and they were very comfortable as well in that recommendation, and felt like that would be a good person for you all to consider. For the natural resources position, you'll see we again had a number of folks who applied under that category. Some of them were picked up by other commissions. Our recommendation to you today is Mark Bennett, and Mark is a Baker County Commissioner. He has been a leader in the sage grouse work in Eastern Oregon, both from the land use perspective, which we felt was really important to bring a little bit of extra land use expertise. He has been leading the way with the county commissioners there. He is also a rancher who has core sage grouse habitat on his ranch and is a model for how you run a working land operation combined with sage grouse habitat. He has had OWEB grants in the past and NRCS projects in the past, and has a lot of statewide respect in how he approaches conversations around land use and agriculture, and has been kind of in the middle of a lot of that around sage grouse. So again, we had another set of outstanding candidates there. At the staff level, we really felt that Mark combined the suite of things that we thought this program really was about. And then we had conversations with Will Newhouser about serving as the liaison. We do think that we've got a lot of board members who are either brand new or leaving. So of the voting board members, I will start by saying we had a limited pool to choose from, because in conversations with the co-chairs, we did think it was important to have a voting member as the liaison. And so Will was very willing to volunteer and will be around for throughout this process. And so we, at our level, are recommending that we think Will would be a good choice, and he has agreed to serve if so designated. And again, in addition, I want to mention that we are lucky that Laura Masterson will be working with us throughout this process for both Board of Agriculture and OWEB. So I am going to stop there and see what questions you have about the process, about the members. And then after we go through this piece, I will just briefly walk through the rulemaking. But this right here is your decision point today. So questions, thoughts, concerns, feedback? Wow. We should move forward, right? We should just quietly move before they wake up.
Randy, let me
Yes, Laura.
recognize Laura.
Well, no, I mean, I was going to move that we,
Oh, please.
I mean, I move the board vote to appoint the Oregon Ag Heritage Commission members for the listed terms as described in Attachment B to the staff report.
It's Gary, I'll second.
Just, I had one thought that we're appointing these people for specific periods of time, but they're actually less than the designated periods because they end on the 1st of January.
They are slightly, yes, that is true. They are slightly less than the official time period.
And I didn't know if we wanted to appoint them kind of like they were listed in the statute.
Maida Lofsgarden, for the record, I think we have that. If you look at Attachment B, we outlined their terms already based on statute.
The length, but it's actually, the 1 year would be less than 1 year, and the 2 years would be less than 2 years, et cetera. And I was just thinking of identifying them relative to the positions in Section 12.
I'm trying to
Designating the
catch-
terms.
So you're saying that we should be explicit in
I'm just
term
a
as
thought,
saying
that, you know,
effective January 1, 2018 for all those terms?
Or I see what you're saying. So I think what you could say is, if I may, the motion would be appointed to terms as reflected in Section 12 of House Bill 3049.
correct.
And that will catch the January 1st. And, okay.
Friendly amendment accepted.
Do you
Okay.
have that, Derek?
So, let's get the motion seconded first.
Gary did.
I'm sorry, Gary?
Did second it.
You did, okay. So it's moved and seconded. Are there questions? And
Just a general disclosure, Jason Robinson for the record. So as Maida pointed out, Nathan Jackson is a Cow Creek tribal member. He does work for the Cow Creek tribe, and I work with Nathan on a daily basis, but I don't see any perceived conflicts of interest. So just wanted to point that out as a disclosure.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Well?
Since I'm on the list, I guess I'll just note that. I'm not sure whether I need to abstain or not, but
Want to
Yes.
recuse yourself from this vote?
I think it'll pass anyway. So sure.
Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Carried, thank you.
Will is abstaining. Are you abstaining, Will?
Yes.
Will is abstaining. All right, so thank you for that. This has been an incredibly lengthy process, so I appreciate your recognition of that. I am going to quickly reference Attachment D, just so you know the details, and I walked through it generally, but the commission, we will be traveling over to Prineville this afternoon for the first commission meeting, which is tomorrow. And then they immediately start into rulemaking. So we will give them an introduction to the program. They've received a lot of materials already. Jump right into succession planning. And then they meet again 3 weeks later to begin rulemaking on conservation management plans. So they are meeting every 3 to 4 weeks between now and the end of May. During that time, they will get all those rules together. We have allowed a little bit of time in case something slips so that if they need another meeting, they can have it. Public notice on those rules will then be in July, which gives time for them to come back together, make any corrections, changes, additions, and then bring it to you in October. We will continue to update you at each meeting. So the Agriculture Heritage Commission will become a standing agenda item on board meetings with an update from members Will Neuhauser and Laura Masterson. And then again, you'll be seeing the rules in front of you in October, but not for the first time. You'll be seeing a discussion around them along the way. So with that, thank you very much for your time on this subject.
Gary?
Ms. Gary, Maida, your enthusiasm is just infectious in this, and I can't believe that this has occurred so quickly. And I just want to say that from my perspective, this makes a statement that's really important to the people in our field, our line of work. And I mean, I can see with the people that are going to be involved with this commission, I know some of them, and this is going to be a success. I mean, I'm really as excited maybe as you are. So.
Thank you, Gary, for saying that. I was pleasantly surprised at so we've had some folks who've been concerned about the program, and you're right, I'm incredibly excited. We have some folks who were concerned, and the one who was most concerned came to the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and my understanding is his public comment there was, I appreciate these members. So the people who have concerns about the program are looking at this membership and saying, we think these are the right people to make it work. So we're excited about it too. Thank you. Oh, yes, Jan.
This is Jan. My question was, can you provide us notice of where and when the meetings will be prior to the meeting, so those who have an interest to attend might do that?
Absolutely. We will send out the link but it doesn't have the exact location and times. So, right? Does it? So we will send you, yes, there's a link up on our website. All of the meetings are in Prineville. Because with this diverse group, we wanted to make this mini meeting centrally located. So they're all in Prineville, and we will send you all the link that has the meeting times and everything else listed. You're welcome to carpool with us, Jan.
Oh.
This is Randy Labby for the record. Derek, I assume that we didn't have any public comment? Thank you.
Can we take a brief pause? We're going to see if the rulemaking folks are done.
Yes.
And the IMW co-presenter is trying desperately to get here, but he's not here yet. So, oh, he's here.
Yeah.
He's trying desperately, and he got here. You should have looked a little bit more desperate. We will check really quickly to see if the rulemaking folks are ready for that piece, and then otherwise we'll proceed.
So we'll take a break sitting in our seats.
Yes.
Upper Middle Fork John Day River Intensively Monitored Watershed Report to the Board. Renee, Ken, and Jim and John.
Okay, good morning, co-chairs, members of the board. For the record, Renee Davis, Deputy Director. I'm joined this morning by Ken Feccio, our Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. Also Jim Ruzicki, who works with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. He is the Program Director for ODFW's East Region Fish Research and Monitoring Group. And John Selker, who is a distinguished professor from Oregon State University. So we're thrilled to have Jim and John here to talk with you about 10 years of work that has happened in the Upper Middle Fork John Day as part of an intensively monitored watershed, or IMW. So by way of background briefly, the IMW was designed to evaluate the implementation of watershed restoration over a large geography and over an extended period of time, in this case a 10-year period, specifically assessing the effects on salmon and steelhead populations and their habitats and also water quality. So the IMW is one of several around the region in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. The primary funding for this work has been provided by NOAA Fisheries, so hopefully Rosemary will join us soon, through a joint funding relationship with Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. So OWEB was identified as the state recipient for the Middle Fork John Day IMW funding that was provided by NOAA and PSMFC Also, though, to ensure that especially the new board members are aware, over the course of the 10-year period, the OWEB board has provided supplemental funding to ensure that all aspects of the research and monitoring that were planned as part of the IMW were fully supported. So thanks, OWEB board, for your support through that time. Another piece of the OWEB role, though, beyond funding, is that for a good chunk of the 10-year period, OWEB staff have served as project coordinators for the IMW work, so really helping to keep what you'll hear shortly was a very large group of researchers and practitioners coordinated and moving forward in step. So I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge Ken's role. In the last several years, he's been a really critical part of the IMW team. We wouldn't be here reporting on 10 years of findings without the commitment that he's shown over the last several years since he's joined the agency, so thanks for that, Ken. So briefly, just we're going to move into the meat of this. So Ken's going to provide a short orientation to the IMW, how it was structured, who the partners are, a little bit more information about the geography. Jim's going to walk us through a summary of the fish monitoring work that occurred over that decade-long period. Then we'll move to John, and he'll talk with you about the water temperature and groundwater monitoring. Ken's going to spend a little bit of time giving you a sense of and a couple examples of how the findings from the IMW have been and are being applied to restoration in the Middle Fork, and then I'll touch briefly on next steps. So I'll be keeping us moving forward, watching the clock, prompting folks to wrap up, so we have plenty of time for question and answer and discussion period. I think that several folks are probably quite interested to dig a little bit deeper in learning about what we've learned over the last 10 years, so we want to make sure you have that opportunity with folks here today. So, Ken.
Thank you, co-chairs, members of the board, Ken Fecho, Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. I just thought I'd just provide a little bit of background on the IMW before Jim and John get into more detailed results of the research that they were responsible for. So this is just a map showing the John Day Basin within the state of Oregon, and then that blue sub-basin is the Middle Fork John Day River sub-watershed. And this is just a zoomed-in map on the Middle Fork John Day sub-basin, and then that sort of that upper Middle Fork John Day River in that bold outline is the IMW study area. This area was selected because that's where the majority of the restoration actions were occurring or anticipated to occur when the IMW was established, and is also a reasonable area in which changes could be monitored and detected. So as Renee mentioned, the IMW for the Middle Fork John Day River was established in, funding was started received in 2008, but before that happened, there was considerable discussions with interested organizations and funders to pick this as Middle Fork John Day River as the IMW study area. That funding was received through PSMFC, and then we started entering into funding agreements with different organizations that were interested in doing the monitoring. Those data collection efforts started in 2008, and some of those are still occurring today. It's important to note that some of the fish monitoring was occurring before 2008 and is reported in the report and is sort of established some important baseline data. The restoration actions that were being monitored began in 2008 and are still occurring to this day. But it's important to note that significant and enormous amount of restoration was occurring in this watershed going back to the 90s. In 2010, OWEB provided additional funding to a contractor to develop an experimental design and implementation plan that really detailed the researchers' goals and objectives based on the existing and ongoing restoration actions. And then in 2017, at the end of the year, we completed the final summary report, which summarizes the data primarily from 2008 to 2016. This is just a figure that's in the report. And again, you guys have the executive summary in your binder and the the final summary report is available on our website, and we can work with you guys to get that, so you have access to that information. This is a figure that Gretchen in our office helped us develop just to show the participating agencies in the IMW, the state agencies, federal agencies, NGOs, universities, and tribal government. We provided funding to certain organizations on that fish that for participation in the IMW and to do monitoring. That includes ODF&W, the North Fork John Day Watershed Council, Oregon State University, University of Oregon, Washington State University, and the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs. And some funding also went to the Forest Service PNW Research Station in Corvallis. So we identified 100 active and passive restoration actions that in the IMW study period, again, 2008 to present. And those restoration actions were designed specifically to address various limiting factors. And 30 of those were along the main stem, Middle Fork John Day River, and approximately 70 were in the tributaries. It's important to note that this is a conservative estimate because as we were compiling the restoration inventory, there were certain projects that we had incomplete information and didn't have confidence included in the inventory. It's also important to note that this map does not indicate all the upland management actions that the Forest Service took. A lot of this land is managed by the Forest Service in this area, and they did a lot of work, doing road treatments, invasive plant treatments, prescribed burns and thinning that we were unable to incorporate into this restoration inventory, but contribute to watershed health. Some of the categories that we identified when we developed this inventory of restoration actions include flow increase, floodplain reconnection, channel reconfiguration, fish passage, upland management, riparian management, such as livestock fencing and riparian plantings, and then in-stream habitat improvement, such as large woody debris placements. The summary report results from the various monitoring efforts that occurred in the IMW. There were steelhead and Chinook monitoring, again, adult and juvenile monitoring that Jim will discuss in a little bit. And then there was also extensive water temperature and groundwater monitoring that John will cover later in the presentation. There was also various physical habitat and geomorphology monitoring that occurred at various scales, so watershed scale, sub-watershed scale, reach, and individual restoration projects to look at changes to the habitat. Some examples, looking at fine-scale habitat changes, we're looking at channel geomorphology, say like pool depth and fish cover. There was other monitoring to look at changes associated with restoration actions, and that include macroinvertebrates, vegetation, and socioeconomics. And socioeconomics is one of the unique features to our IMW. There's other IMWs in the Pacific Northwest that are interested in this, but did not take a formal approach to detecting socioeconomic changes associated with the investments in restoration. It's important to note that several of the monitoring efforts include modeling to predict changes based on restoration actions and changing climate. We heard some discussion about board members' interest in that, so I wanted to point that out. These modeling efforts help understand where and what restoration actions should be prioritized, and also help inform the timeline in which we expect to realize improvements in the system. So the executive summary is in front of you, and the final summary report is available online, and basically provides information on the background, which we covered a little bit today, overall key findings by research topic, lessons learned, and recommendations. And some of those will be discussed today by Jim and John, and then next steps will be covered by Renee. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jim Rizicki to cover fish monitoring.
Jim Rizicki with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I've been involved in the IMW work from the beginning, essentially, when we were trying to determine where we were going to focus some intensively monitored efforts on some basin in Oregon, and we had some ongoing work in the Middle Fork, and so we decided that would be a good place to start. My presentation is going to be rather salmon-centric because that is essentially why we're receiving the money for the work we're doing there. I'll provide some reasoning for why the Middle Fork was adopted in the first place, provide some results, and then break those results down into why we might have seen the results that we did eventually see, and then use a modeling effort to show you some of the lessons we learned from a fish perspective. And I want to challenge you right now to not think of salmon in this picture here with big fish, even though they brought a fair amount of attention to the Middle Fork in the past. We've had 3 salmon die-offs, Chinook salmon die-offs, since 2007, and so that's brought some press to this basin and some notoriety, but what we really focused our efforts on in the Middle Fork was measuring the response of small fish, the production, the freshwater production of the basin itself. So a little bit of background here, why the Middle Fork was adopted from a fish perspective. This is a very fishery-centric graph here showing the number of juvenile fish produced in the basin as a function of a metric of adults here, measured in salmon reds or nests that the fish are producing. The one thing I want you to notice from this graph, there's a standard stock recruitment curve average put on the points that were generated through time. And note that there's a very much asymptote to that curve right there. There seems to be a ceiling to the production of fish in the basin. Same picture here, and now it's shown in blue for the Middle Fork in comparison to neighboring watershed, the upper main stem, that has a little bit more water, but as you see, the Middle Fork is underperforming the upper main stem. So it seems to be a good place to target restoration actions in order to see a response in the fisheries. So moving on to some results we collected over the last 10 years during the period of the IMW. And I have a series of graphs here showing the number of smolts produced in the basin. It's a productivity measure for Chinook salmon through time, through the time series we have on the Middle Fork. And the vertical line there essentially shows the initiation of the IMW, or when a great deal of the monitoring efforts were initiated. Lots of variation in this graph, but the thing to note is there is no real change from before and after. Before on the left, after on the right. Bringing in our control watershed, a watershed we wanted to compare the Middle Fork to, the upper main stem that I referred to previously. Similar results. Not a great deal of change of before and after, even though there's some variation through time. And then to complete the comparison in a BACI model or before-after control impact model, in red there, it's shown that, again, variation through time, but we saw no basin-wide fish response that we could statistically measure in the basin. Similar picture for steelhead. We don't have the long time series that we do for Chinook salmon. The Middle Fork steelhead population here is shown in blue, again, in a productivity measure for the basin. and compared to our control watershed for steelhead, which is over on the South Fork John Day. Again, no increase certainly for the Middle Fork population as a whole. Breaking that down a little bit to look for why we didn't necessarily see a response. Here we have some model results based on some mark recapture work we did for spring Chinook in the basin. On the bottom, it shows stream flow in the Middle Fork, and the response of survival for juvenile Chinook during the summertime. Notice the July and August curves are rather steep, suggesting that flows highly influence survival of Chinook during those periods. And then in September, shown in green, the curve isn't nearly as steep, but and also quite elevated, suggesting that survival is much greater in September than earlier in the summer. Why that might be the case might be shown here, where now we're looking at steelhead instead of Chinook, but the case is similar. This is summer survival of juvenile steelhead as a function of temperature in the basin. And again, there's a decline in survival as temperatures increase. Not a big surprise, but certainly something corroborated by our empirical evidence. And then also in the basin, we looked at the effects of temperature on the distribution of juvenile Chinook. And here it's the proportion of juvenile Chinook at sites we monitored as a function of temperature on the bottom. And you see it drops off significantly around 20 degrees, which is fairly typical, but it shows that much of the basin is not habitable for juvenile Chinook during parts of the summer. So to address lessons learned, I'll use a life cycle model perspective that was built during the period of the IMW. It would have been nice to have this tool before the IMW was initiated, but it was certainly built during the period based on information we were collecting during the IMW. And the model is a collaboration of some folks from ODFW who we provided basically all the data for the tools, but it was developed by a wide collaboration and funded through Bonneville Power Administration. It is a published tool now, and I can provide a link to anybody who might be interested. It's probably referenced in the final report as my... It's complicated, and you would probably fall asleep if I had to explain the whole thing, and I don't necessarily understand the entire model myself. Suffice to say that it brings survey data in that was collected on the Middle Fork itself. It brings that data through a couple models, both a physical hydraulic model and some habitat fish relationship models. It feeds those and scales it up to the population level by looking at habitat throughout the basin. And then we rectify those values with some empirical evidence that we're collecting on the fish in the basin to actually produce the model results themselves. So a few brief summaries from the model that are suggestive of what we have been doing in the basin. May not necessarily be what was the best effort to partake as far as restoration to actually move the fish in a positive direction. This is not necessarily meant to be critical of the actions that have occurred. It's just emblematic of what the basin needed in order for some of these actions to actually have a positive effect. So the model looked at increasing the habitat complexity in the basin, whether that would have a positive effect on juvenile production, or whether influencing the temperature instead would have a positive result. As you might expect from my lead-in, habitat complexity did not necessarily or would not necessarily have a positive result based on these model estimates. However, if, for example, shade was provided to the stream and temperatures were reduced in the watershed, the model suggests that there could be a 1.3 to 2.5 time increase in production in the basin. Certainly something that is much more difficult to achieve, but something that we point to being very important for the watershed. And just a plan view of some of those results as far as restoring vegetation in the watershed. Here, moving from left to right, blue indicates habitable water by juvenile salmon, red indicates habitat that is not conducive to salmon survival or growth. If you move from left to right, by restoring some vegetation in a moderate way in the basin, you would get a modest increase in the production of juvenile fish. However, if you went to a natural thermal potential, something more historic in the basin, you would certainly see a nearly twofold increase in production. So to wrap up the fish component, I just wanted to emphasize that we believe freshwater habitat is still limiting production in the basin. We could not find a population scale change in the two populations we monitored in the basin over the last 10 years. We have identified limiting factors based on empirical evidence that flow and temperature are still limiting production in the basin. And the model has told us that that habitat complexity is not necessarily limiting, but temperature certainly still is. And John is going to lead us into the temperature component and part of the discussion here.
I'm just going to switch slides really quick.
Great. Thanks very much for having me here today. It's a great pleasure after all the work we've done out there to be able to share with you some of the results. Looks like some of the pretty dark there, but this is a beautiful day on the John Day River. It was an amazing opportunity, and I want to reiterate Renee's point that the staff of the Watershed Enhancement Board really made a huge difference, and they really were committed and did wonderful work with us. So without them, I think we would have had much less success, and I really appreciate the context that they gave us. Oops. Oh, well, this is previous. I think I hit that twice. Okay. So I want to first start with a few key things for you to take away. And one of them is that restoration efforts can change temperature. But if the temperature modeling is not taken seriously, restoration efforts could both increase or decrease temperature. And so it's a key point that it's not a given that if you do something that looks nice, it's going to necessarily improve temperature. If we look at the main stem of a river, there's a lot of turbulence and a lot of energy in that water. And so that fights stratification. And so this concept of local pools of cold water was not seen in this experiment. So that's a very key point, that there's a lot of really lovely ideas, and they don't necessarily occur in nature. And when I say, I'm going to not present all the data we collected, and why is that? Because it's several terabytes of data. What we did is we took fiber optic cables and laid them down the river, measuring the temperature every meter for typically on the order of 10 kilometers each summer. So we're measuring those each 5 minutes. So you can imagine we're measuring 50,000 points every 5 minutes and collecting all those data. So if there were local cold spots, we would have seen them. And so I don't say this based on just kind of a guess. The other thing is that, we, of course, were independent of the people doing the restoration work, but we were often consulted. And it was really an exciting dynamic, having the ability to be watching and then be part of the conversation. And many of the I was the temperature guy, and so I would raise my hand and say, okay, the temperature story, tell me this restoration effort, what's its impact on temperature? And they'd always say, well, Dr. Selker, it's more complicated than that. And I want to point out today that actually it isn't. That a key point I want you to take away is that if you look at a surface of water, that's where the energy flux occurs, right? If you double the surface area of the water, you double the energy exchange. If the river's getting colder, it'll get colder over a larger area. That'll cool the river more effectively. If the river's getting warmer and you increase the area, you will warm it. And I say that with 0.99 R squared. Okay, so this is the way it actually works. So I think I want to make sure we got those couple of key takeaways out first. Now, the tributaries and the main stem are different. And when we look out over this beautiful scene here, we say, where did the water come from in the rivers? It came from the big lumpy things, the mountains, right? It does not come from the riverine context. And so tributaries which access the water and bring it to the main stem, you should be keeping in mind that what goes on, once you're in the main stem, you've really accumulated all the water you're going to have. And so the idea that groundwater upwelling in a main stem river is going to change the temperature significantly is misplaced. Okay? That said, in a tributary, the water accumulating significantly with distance along, and these groundwater upwellings and hyporheic exchanges can be very important. And so what we see is that where there is a groundwater upwelling, that'll of course drop the temperature more to the groundwater temperature, and so typically that'll really reduce peak temperatures. And similarly with hyporheic exchange, when it goes through the gravels, that acts as a large thermal flywheel which compresses the temperature. And so when we look in a tributary, and this is the Big Boulder, and what we're looking from upstream to downstream to the right, and the red line is the maximum temperature. And what you see is that after about, I think it's 600 meters of distance, the temperature drops significantly. And that's because as the river came around this corner, there was a big groundwater upwelling, and there was a large hyporheic exchange, a big gravel bar. And so on the bottom, we've shown both hyporheic exchange locations and groundwater locations as identified with this fiber optic technology, where we could actually watch the micro fluctuations in the river temperature and see when it was being suppressed. So in a tributary, you do see some really interesting groundwater effects and hyporheic exchange effects. These tributaries typically are also steeper, higher gradient, and you can see different dynamics both where groundwater and hyporheic. But they tend to have a steeper gradient, which gives rise to much more energy to go through the bed materials. Whereas if you walk along the middle fork of the John Day River, you'll see you can walk comfortably, and a lot of it's very embedded and very kind of paved, and you don't have that same degree of hyporheic exchange, so the potential's not really there. The idea of getting a cold refuge in a river fundamentally depends on the density being increased in the colder water than the warmer water. And so what the question in an engineering perspective is, does that water get purged out? And so here's a classic model which we have for purging, and indeed we can calculate the velocity and the amount of turbulence using the Froude number, and we can see that actually no, in the main stem of the John Day River, you'd have to be completely off channel to be able to capture a cold pool. The stuff in the middle of the channel will simply mix in. And that's exactly what we saw with, as I say, tens of thousands of measurements. Another interesting technology that's been highly used for well over a decade now is the FLIR kind of approach, where we take a snapshot of a river. And typically we're going to do it at the time of day when it's most critical. So we'll take the snapshot at 2 to 4 in the afternoon. And time again, we'll do that 2 to 4 in the afternoon. And interestingly, these are two FLIR snapshots, and you see these really cold, there's a red arrow there showing a cold spot that persists year after year, time after time. And it was very strange to us because we couldn't find any reason that that should be there from a tributary point of view, et cetera. And so we actually ran our fiber optic cables down the river, and these are some values from like 5 p.m. till 9 a.m., just showing the curves of how the temperature was fluctuating in that particular spot. And the interesting thing was, in the middle of the day, it showed a big decrease in temperature through that spot. But in the mornings and the evenings, there was no temperature change. So we started looking at that and saying, could it be that this is just a giant cold pool of water that just takes a long time to flush out? And indeed, this is where a lot of the big fish were found, and it was you couldn't, when we put our cable in, we're over our heads and things like that, there's a lot of water there. And so we decided, well, let's just take a look at this from a very simple modeling point of view. We simply take the temperature upstream and route it through, just through advection, no exchange of temperature. And sure enough, just routing water, because it was such a deep cold pool, our little red dots, which our model almost exactly reproduce the observed temperatures. So the thing is that we had this apparent cool pool that you should do lots of, maybe there's groundwater upwelling, maybe there's lots of things to do there for restoration point of view, but it wasn't understood really that that was a simply hydraulic property. Now, that doesn't mean that it wasn't important. The big fish were really enjoying that because they could take refuge there in the day and find that cooler water that was just simply waiting. But it shows the importance of understanding and attributing temperature to the correct processes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I was faced with the question of can we predict the impact of a restoration effort on this temperature? And my department is where heat source came out of, so biological and ecological engineering departments where we developed heat source. And I was pretty confident, having served on those committees and all this stuff, that yes, we knew how to do this. It's all basic thermodynamics. And so the key thing is that the water, it's simply an energy balance. If you put a pot on your stove for a certain amount of time, it increases temperature according to the amount of energy you put into it, and same with a river. So if you can reduce solar exposure, that can reduce the amount of heating that goes on, and if you can reduce the surface area with the same amount of water, you will reduce the increase in temperature, okay? And so this was really fun to look at in the case of one particular restoration effort. The red line shows the southern channel here at the Oxbow on the Middle Fork, and then the green line shows the northern channel. And what we did is the restoration effort got rid of it was a two parallel channel situation, which of course from a surface area point of view is terrible. And so get rid of the green channel, just go with the red channel, and then let's see what we end up with. So we're going to report results for those two red stars going downstream to the left. And it doesn't look too dramatic in this picture. However, for that one restoration effort, we can see actually the blue line is the post-restoration, and then the solid red line is the pre. And what you'll see is that the top temperatures were nipped off by almost a full degree. And that's a full degree off in the temperature in the main stem of a river, just by one restoration effort. Interestingly, it also means that the nighttime temperatures were increased. Because what happens is when you reduce the area, there's not as much area for long wave radiation to be lost. And so because the river cools off due to long wave radiation, you reduce the area. So the whole thing was compressed. And so the fluctuations in temperature reduced by a couple of degrees, just due to one restoration effort in the main stem of the channel. And so here we kind of show some of these peak daytime changes right at the confluence, right downstream of the restoration effort. We lost almost a full degree C. And then if you go further downstream, just to kind of see, does it persist? Yes. If you go a couple kilometers downstream, you still have more than half a degree of cooling. And that happens both on the maximum daytime and the 7-day values. Now, the next restoration project right downstream of this was taking my big cold pool and turning it into a meandering river. And there were some very hot discussions about this, particularly on my side, because I love that big cold pool. And I just said, look, if you guys meander this thing, you're slowing the water down and you're increasing the surface area, you're going to increase the temperature. And this is where I got the kind of Dr. Selker talk. And indeed, then we went through and modeled the whole thing with heat source, validating it based on all of our fiber optic measurements. And then we ran all these different scenarios and plotted the results. The red line showing just the effective number of square meters of surface area, and the blue line showing the effect of the shade area. and indeed a shade percentage. And what you see is, as you'd expect, if you increase the shade, you can cool a river in a very predictable way. Similarly, if you reduce the number of square meters of which the heat is exchanged, it is linear to 0.9999, I guess it was. So it's just, and this is really great news from an evaluation of restoration projects point of view, because now we can just say, look, we don't have to be really explicit with exactly how many degrees we expect to get, although we could kind of get that too. But when we look at the pre and post design, we simply can add up this number of square meters and say, is this going to be a net cooling? And on of the restoration efforts we looked at, only the Oxbow effort was a significant reduction in square meters. And maybe that explains, since temperature was so important, why the fish populations didn't change more. We did a big groundwater monitoring study as well. We had, I guess, like 40 wells out there monitoring over years. And the question there there's a lot of the idea of connecting the floodplain and the stream, and that by having that level of the river higher, you're going to increase late season flow. And this is kind of almost popular, accepted stuff. Well, we're engineers, and so let's actually do this. And so we look at this, and there's what's called a Bousnesque model, and I'm not going to go into the details, but the point is that we can actually get very accurate predictions of what the impact is. And the key thing I want you to think about is if you increase the water level, then you have decreased the amount of water that'll drain into the river, because if the river were lower, it could drain more of the soil. What that means when put together, and here's our model showing we can model the groundwater and surface. We can model the groundwater profiles in the valleys really well. And so, what's the upshot? 100 days after the last rain or so, when you had the critical time of August, the increase in stream flow, if you would be as high as 0.0003 cubic feet per mile of stream. That's on the order of tablespoons. So the point, and in fact, though, that's ignoring evaporation. If you include evaporation, you're going to lose 1 CFS per every 200 acres that look green. So just be alert to the fact that just putting elevating the river, reconnecting the floodplain, great stuff for winter situation for the juveniles, but from a late season flow point of view, it is generally going to lose water. Okay, so in brief, then, big pools mix in the main stem condition. Wet meadows do not contribute to late season flow. DTS was a technology that did allow us to reveal a few key pieces that had been poorly understood, and that the stream temperature dynamics are in some sense simple. That is, that the total surface area is quite predictive of the ultimate temperature, and that any given well-meaning restoration effort need not necessarily give rise to an improvement in temperature conditions. Thanks very much.
So I'm just going it's Ken Fetcho, Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. Switch back. So when we talked to the monitoring subcommittee about this, we thought it would be helpful to, based on their feedback, to share some application of IMW findings that the researchers implemented as this information became available. And again, keep in mind, it wasn't always available before they started doing this. And so as part of this adaptive management process, as the different researchers were going to their next project, they would remember what John said and try to incorporate that. So I thought I'd try to give you a couple examples of that. And so the Bureau of Reclamation works in a collaborative fashion with the Confederate Tribes of the Warm Springs, and they help them design their restoration projects. And so the next phases that they were working on, they did incorporate that concept of trying to keep the channel as narrow as possible when they were doing additional channel remeandering projects. And then also in another research project, they documented extensive browse impacts from elk and deer in this area. And so when they designed these projects, they actually put extensive elk fencing in the whole floodplain to keep the deer and elk out because it significantly impacts plant growth. So those are two things that the tribes in BOR have been doing going forward. Another large landowner in the area is the U.S. Forest Service, and they were very interested in incorporating these findings as they design future projects. And one of the things that they did was they worked with recently they worked with a freshwater trust to use the heat source model to identify areas to prioritize riparian plantings, to do future riparian plantings where they think they can get the biggest reductions in temperature and that are also important areas for fish habitat. So those are two examples of different restorationists in the area incorporating these findings to design and implement restoration projects.
So before we move into next steps, I just want to briefly underscore, which I think you probably have a sense of, there's a rich amount of information emerging from the IMW effort. So ultimately, it's already resulted in 11 master's theses, 5 PhD dissertations, and a yet-to-be-determined number of scientific publications. I say that not just to give you interesting tallies, but all of that information can serve as additional foundational knowledge to inform restoration. And harking back to the conversation yesterday about the strategic plan, and one of the strategies under coordinated monitoring was determining how we can better encourage linkages and improve communication between practitioners and scientists. And I think this is a great example of where we have a wealth of knowledge emerging, and I think there is some requirement upon us as board and staff to determine how to best get that into the hands of folks who are making decisions about restoration design and could really benefit from having access to this information. So in terms of next steps, we essentially have two categories of next steps. First, focus specifically on the Middle Fork John Day IMW group. So the IMW continues to function as a team of researchers and practitioners working together. ODFW has taken on more of the coordination responsibility for the IMW, and there is ongoing monitoring work that's being conducted by ODFW on the fish side, North Fork John Day Watershed Council on the temperature side, and in collaboration with the tribe. So this work is ongoing. There were critical core data that we wanted to continue to collect so as not to lose those key data sets and time series while we are digesting the findings from the study. There also are some adjustments underway to the temperature monitoring planning, so really stepping back now that we've had a chance to analyze the data and really determining, are we monitoring temperature in all of the right places? So a refinement of that process. And then following on what Ken had mentioned about the application and adaptive management piece, in May, I think it is, there is going to be a joint meeting between the IMW group and the John Day Partnership. The John Day Partnership, as a reminder, was one of the first formerly known as capacity building FIPs that was awarded. So I think that will provide a fantastic opportunity for some of that communication that John signaled had started under the IMW, and certainly can continue as the John Day Partnership is completing their strategic action plan and really going more deeply into restoration design. The second set of next steps are more at the region-wide scale. So I mentioned during my opening comments that the Middle Fork John Day IMW is one of many IMWs that were funded by NOAA and PSMFC around the region. So there is currently a big push, and Rosemary might want to speak to this a little bit more during some of the dialogue, to one, compile across the IMWs the findings from this 10 years of work. So there's work underway by NOAA, a contractor, and also the Pacific Northwest Aquatic Monitoring Partnership to make sure that we have this information well organized, available across the region, and also pairing that up with some non-NOAA funded IMW work to ensure that we have that strong foundation of information. There will be a workshop bringing together representatives from the IMWs across the region to really digest what have we learned, what worked, what didn't work, what refinements might be needed, certainly to restoration, but also to maybe some of the research and monitoring that we expect to happen probably in fall of 2018. And then NOAA also has a contractor on board really doing a third-party critical review of the IMW findings from across the region. And I think that that will help ensure that in the future, limited monitoring and research and evaluation funding that's available is really targeted to focusing on the right parameters, in addition to hopefully helping us rethink what might some of our refinements to the restoration approach across the region be. So with that, we can wrap up and take any questions that you might have.
Questions, comments from the board? Observations, Randy?
Randy Labby for the record. I was just curious if your research determined in the Middle Fork whether the temperature regime is more affected by flow issues or more influenced by riparian habitat conditions. Is there a dominant issue?
I would say it's not a. Both are prominent. I think that when you get to late season flow, a lot of times the wetted area of the river is fairly static. It's found fairly and it doesn't change dramatically with the flow levels. So in that sense, if you have twice as much water going down the river and you have the same amount of energy hitting it per square meter and you have essentially the same number of same area, then increasing the flow really is effective at keeping the temperature down. So you can inherit the temperature from upstream further downstream. But at the same time, one of the really amazing things to see once the animals were fenced out of the channel, we saw the collapse of channel width, areas where we could spread 3 people stretched arm to arm, and then after 10 years, seemed like you could almost touch the sides with 1 person. So that's talking about a factor of 2-ish, we could say, in reduction of surface area that happened just due to the invasion of the rushes and vegetation. But the efforts to increase channel water were very important. And I will say, I think there's some fantastic opportunities. When we look at we did the groundwater monitoring. There is a lot of water out in those side areas, and that water could be pumped. And interestingly, it always gets recharged every winter and spring. And so, in fact, we could incentivize farmers to put in wells, pump water during the critical time, which is a fairly modest amount of water compared to the amount of water that goes down that river in the winter, and then have those little alluvial aquifers get recharged. So I think there's some really interesting options from an engineering point of view where we could really increase the stream flow and potentially even increase the irrigation.
Steve? And then, you had a
Yeah. I've modeled salmon bioenergetics for at least a couple of decades, and so I really found your talk very interesting, and your conclusion about thermal primacy as the main driving force just seems so relevant because it's supported by work that's been done in lakes and oceans and so forth, so I really support that. I could talk for hours on this, but I'll just limit myself to one specific question and then one broader question on restoration. The specific question is to Jim. I saw that you showed different survival rates related to water flows. Is that directly a result of differences in temperatures because of the water flows? Not, what's the mechanism?
That was done through a AIC process, where you just bring in correlates and look at influential correlates in the model. And it just happened that flow was the top influential correlate that we brought in. You can imagine that flow influences space for fish, of course, but also temperature as well. Through more flow coming through the system is going to ameliorate the heating aspects of solar input, for example. But I can't speak to exactly what the mechanism is there, but I think it's temperature and flow are interacting, definitely.
Yeah, I know in areas like the California Delta, flow is extremely relevant as a primary topic, but the mechanism of how it affects fishes is pretty vague, and maybe just running an analysis that showed flow rates versus temperature for those same set of data and see if there's a correlation there might be useful. The general question is, if you look at the temperature response of fish, it is a threshold level thing. You showed around 20 degrees, but actually it's around 18 or so. It starts really dropping off precipitously. And when you think about it from a restoration point of view, it does no good to go from 24 to 22 degrees. So if you cool it by a couple of degrees, it's still not going to be good for the fish. You have to get below that threshold. If you think of it as almost an on-off threshold for trying to cool a certain stream down to 18 degrees, let's say, or maybe 20, I wonder if that changes the restoration and changes the temperature calculations, because you're not just trying to cool the stream, you're trying to change the stream from what it is to 18, a maximum of 18 degrees. Because once you get over that threshold, it's bad for fish. So it's a threshold on-off kind of, you can call it an on-off, but it is a threshold response, not just a cooling. A 24 to 23 to 22 does no real value for those fish. It has to go below that bioenergetic threshold. Does that change the way you look at restoration? Are there pools or something that could be done that would get it to those levels of temperatures?
I'll let John weigh in a bit, but first, you also have to consider that the temperature is non-static through the summer.
Right, right.
And so we know the fish move into tributaries when the main stem gets too warm. And so you can think of it as a function of how long the fish can inhabit as much habitat as possible. So even if you did bring it down a few degrees, that could be beneficial for production for the system as well.
And that could be modeled, determine what the relative
Correct.
impact of that is versus a cool pool or something where they might get a significant pulse.
Yeah, and a PhD student working on this project, by the way, has a bioenergetic model that we're using to understand some of what's going on in some of the restoration efforts in Camp Creek particularly. In terms of that threshold, I'm an engineer, so I'll just have to believe you, but the way I think of this river is that let's say it crosses that threshold, and let's say we do a restoration which reduces the local temperature above that, where that threshold is crossed. Basically, it rolls that threshold downstream. And so in terms of the habitable area, even if it were a threshold, is kind of linearly associated with the ability to control temperature upstream. The more, just as Jim's figure showed, the greater control we have over temperature upstream, the further downstream we have habitat. And it's really impressive to see in this river how these fish come up the river and their red carpet rolls up to this tiny compact area in the headwaters where they can make it maybe over the course of the summer. And so I think, to me, that's yes, you could view it as a particular numerical value as being the drop dead, if you will. But I think for my mental model is much more about extending that region. And that, I think, does extend more or less. You could add up the number of square meters that we can have of water, and you choose to have them all up here, or you can bring that down. And by bringing that downstream, then you can access a lot more tributaries. And those tributaries will provide cool water habitats almost the whole summer long in almost all cases.
Yeah, fish have that mobility that kind of works, because the way it tends to work is fish just basically stop feeding when they reach a certain temperature. And they'll lose weight and they can survive for a while, but that's the mechanism. So.
Gary, then Randy, and then Rosemary. Gary.
It's Gary. It's fascinating. John, you mentioned putting this water out onto meadows late in the season and testing that, how it had an effect on. And I just wondering if, I assume those meadows had been harvested or something like that. I'm just wondering if this was if that type of a floodplain were different with vegetation and trees and things like that on it, if the results from maybe it's not even possible on a main stem, but if the results to cooling that return flow would have been different than out on a bare meadow.
Yeah, okay. So we actually have a really cool parallel study going on the Walla Walla River. And the Walla Walla River, you may recall, they used to cut off entirely from flow up till the year 2000. And then they had to restore flow for endangered species. And then we had to figure out where to get the water for the fish and for the farmers. And so what we did is put in, I think there are now 11 infiltration basins that are scattered around the Milton Freewater area that percolate water into the river and create significant late season flow. And so that's an example of spreading. What we do is we put that water out again in the winter and the spring when it's available due to natural river flow, and we're not taking water that's critical for habitat. And then that water takes, on the order of months to go from these remote infiltration galleries to the river. And it's also available for pumping so that farmers can take water from that enhanced aquifer level rather than taking it from the main stem, so leaving the water in the river. So that is an example of what I'm talking about. I obviously had very little time to explain the nuances of what we have talked about, but the key point is that typically as the reconnection of the floodplain to the river is a concept that applies primarily in the winter during floods, so that juvenile fish and other can when the river bounces out of its banks because it's closer to the river, then they'll have a slower moving water. The fish can take advantage of that. I was not suggesting that we we irrigate the landscape or anything like that. What I was saying is that if you do bring the river up and if you do that floodplain connectedness, which is great, for winter situation. In the summer, you're going to have the water intrinsically closer to the roots, whatever your plant cover might be, which will increase evapotranspiration, which will then be water lost. And where's that water? What would that water otherwise have been? It would have probably been in the river. So when you increase the height of the water table, you will get lush green vegetation. You can think of 1 liter per second per hectare as the classic amount of evaporation. So, pouring water 1 liter per second every time you see a hectare, that's what's going on out there 24/7. So green, lush area takes a lot of water, and that was my point. I hope that's clear.
Mm-hmm. Randy, then Rosemary.
So Randy Labby, thanks. This is really interesting work that you're doing. I'm just curious, has the study included temperature regimes going back, 20, 30 years? Because, we had those incredible returns in early part of the century. And the native steelhead in the John Day, I've always considered it, kind of the gold standard of the Columbia system overall. And so has the temperature regime changed measurably in the last 20 or 30 years, or is it been deemed dysfunctional during all that period?
Well, I think it's pure speculation. So let me just start with that. That's not well. We have a lot of photographs. We have some data, but it's difficult to be confident of exactly what the geometry of that channel was. But we can say that looking at the way the channel responds now to the reduction of grazing pressure, we see the channel going from a broad U-shaped channel into an overhanging kind of cusped channel, if you will. Yeah. And that transition is quite dramatic and actually, of the order of decades that occurs. Our modeling shows that if you reduce the surface area of the river, then you'll have impact on temperature. I think that the Native American burning practices, I don't think would have strongly impacted that, because when you have the vegetation that we see, the remnant vegetation from old channel locations, the brush is really thick and there's tall brush, and that looks like it could regrow following a fire, for example. So I believe that the channels were much more compact and they were much better shaded, and that would lead to intrinsically lower temperatures over a longer distance. The upstream area from where our study was carried out, of course, is a lot of it's in private hands, and there are some really highly impacted, heavily grazed areas that are continuing to have significant heating that we think, I don't want to say we, but I think could lead to some significant improvements without a great loss of area for grazing.
Just one quick question. Does the bass fishery extend up into the Middle Fork? Are the bass there just in a similar way that they are on the main stem?
The bass do extend up into the Middle Fork. It's basically at the end of their distribution, and so there's minimal impact from the bass. They're basically there utilizing habitat that's been vacated by the salmonids for temperature reasons.
Thanks.
Back to
Rosemary?
your question concerning the
Yes, I
the
just wondered
fisheries-
if there had been a change in the bass presence up in that area, but it's just always been that way.
There's been a gradual expansion of the bass in the basin. And, you know, they were introduced back in the 60s, and they've been expanding ever since. And right now, their upstream extent is limited by the temperature of the water and their ability to grow and feed in those cooler temperatures.
I wonder if their presence up there affects juvenile production significantly.
There is a research component to that. I can't recall her name offhand. Out of the University of Washington, two researchers have been doing a fair amount of work on that. They didn't look at direct losses, and we, as an agency, have tried to look at direct losses, you know, predation by bass on salmonids, and the evidence we have is it's still rather limited.
Thanks.
Rosemary.
Rosemary Furphy, thank you for this presentation. Two questions. One, how was the reference watershed used? And with regard to understanding its physical characteristics that could have potentially guided the restoration work, and I'm thinking particularly the meandering and the spreading of the water. And then I have one more. Thank you.
From a physical perspective, there was no reference. The reference watersheds were merely used for a fish-centric perspective. And they were selected because we had data there, and they're nearby, and we had correlation evidence that suggested that they followed a similar tract, but they were somewhat independent. You know, of course, there was no exchange of biota between the two populations. Right, and less, you know, fewer restoration actions certainly occurring in those other watersheds, concurrent with those that were in the Middle Fork.
And then a second question. I believe, and I think it's Bridge Creek, but were there beaver analogs established that may have been able to have deeper, presumably cold water pools, or evidence of historical beaver, and how did that work in the landscape and potentially contribute to survival of those populations historically?
So, Rosemary, there is a Bridge Creek IMW that's separate from this. Yep, and Chris Jordan from NOAA has been intimately involved in that work. And there were, yes, what you described for Bridge Creek is all correct in terms of beaver dam analogs separate from the Upper Middle Fork John Day IMW.
And there were no analogs installed in the Middle Fork John Day, although they are being considered now.
We did have one beaver dam go in during the across where we did the fiber optic work, and we didn't see a significant cool pool associated with it. We did see some really. It was depressing to see all of our cuttings get, you know, mowed down. But then downstream, we did see that the willows had planted themselves. The little seedlings had planted, you know, the clippings had planted themselves in the riverbed. So there are some really interesting effects on the long term with respect to future shading that have to do with the actual eating of these animals. And so I think that the analogs, I don't know. Our data did not show a significant cool pool effect. But their teeth and their behavior with the vegetation did seem to be interesting.
So I think we're probably getting short on time. Is that correct?
Okay. Any last questions for these guys?
Is there, Laura
Laura.
Masterson, is there is some of this work happening on the west side as well with the, like intensively monitored watershed on the west side?
So there has been in the Trask And some number of years ago, the board did provide some funding, probably back in 2007, to contribute to that. So Trask and Hinkle, that actually recently was reported out to the Board of Forestry. That's focused more on different approaches to harvest on forest lands. But I'm happy to share some information.
Okay, but nothing in the Willamette Valley?
Not to my knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Liza Jane.
Careful.
Liza Jane, did you monitor for any micronutrient availability in this project?
So this is Ken Fetcho. The micro and macronutrients were not sampled for.
But macroinvertebrates were sampled for, and those were found to be very interesting.
So what we can do is make sure we distribute the link to this final report. There's a summary report, and then there's extensive appendices that have each of the individual research projects' final and completed report as well for more information, for a deeper dive.
So thanks, Jim and John, for making the trip over.
Okay, thank you all for the report. This is very interesting. All right, now we're going to go back to the focused investment partnership administrative rules.
So for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, I'm passing around, pass it carefully, because what we did is made all of the changes that you suggested, and then there was one substantive change that came up around the 25% match that when staff had a minute to pause and realize what we had put in there, it wasn't exactly right. So there's a replaced page. You'll see a cross out and then a replaced page. What we are going to do is go very quickly through the changes that you all proposed. And what I would ask each of you to do is you kind of remember the things that you had suggested to change. So we're just going to go through and make sure that we caught those changes accurately. And then we're going to hit the section around match, which is, I think, 0010. So just so you know, there is one substantive one that we're going to spend a little bit more time talking with you about. So, Eric's.
So for the record, Eric Hartstein, Policy Coordinator. As Maida said, we made the changes that we talked about earlier this morning. We're starting with the definitions. We swapped out development for implementation FIP, just changed 2 and 3. Removed in the definition for focused investment partnership implementation, the section that states that for a period of up to 6 years and not exceeding 12 million. In the initiative definition, removed the for up to 6 years. And placed the grant types down further into the content of the actual rules, and we'll get to that here in a minute. So is there any questions, concerns about the definitions? Okay. In section 0030, we moved the of significance to the state down into the content of the rule, and then added that at least every 5 years, the board shall approve ecological priorities. Questions or concerns? Okay, section 0040, we added in both 1B and 2B, 2B. Questions, concerns? To be or not to be? Section 0060 removed the word initiative from subsection 1, and in subsection 1B added the capacity to partner, engage the community, and catalyze additional investments applied to activities within the initiative geography, and the semicolon associated with that. And again, in subsection 2, removed initiative. In section 0080, the Focused Investment Partnership Initiative funding recommendation process, we removed in section or subsection 1B, the board subcommittee, now reads the board subcommittee shall interview core partners proposing implementation initiative, and then removed the parenthetical if conducted in 1C, because it is now reading as shall. And moving down to section 0100, which is the FIP Initiative Partnership Agreement section. We removed in subsection 4 the grant types that were listed here and referenced that they are listed in what will be the next section. So moving to that section, which is 0110.
So just a note, this is where you'll switch to the new page that was just inserted into your.
Thank you, Maida. Now I would draw your attention to subsection 7. And this is around the match component. The language that we have now reads, notwithstanding 695, 005, 0060, subsection 2, and subsection 8, initiatives require 25% match reported at the initiative level for the biennium. Each project within the initiative also requires match. Prior to disbursement of board funds for a project, the grantee must provide proof that the matching contribution has been secured for the project. Initiatives that do not meet the required 25% match by the end of the biennium will not be awarded subsequent implementation initiative funding. So what we discussed during the break was that if we are requiring the initiative the 25% match at the initiative level at the beginning of the biennium, there are certain FIP implementation initiatives that may not have that actual 25% secured at the initiative level at the beginning of the biennium, and that this is something that when they're writing their project level grants, they're reporting match with the expectation that that will be reported then by the end of the biennium, the 25% match.
So for the record, Maida Lofsgarden, what Eric noted is right, that we had inadvertently in our conversations caught some of the ones, particularly in rural areas, who are building it as they go, but with a solid expectation they're going to get it, but they might not have that last piece of match secured. We added a piece because there is concern. So again, staff was really good, caught outside that we had maybe made an inadvertent in our edits here. However, you don't want to end up at the end of the biennium with a partnership who said, well, I just never got there, right? 10%, I dinked along as 10%, which they're not likely going to, they're high performing. But we left that piece in that says, okay, if they don't get there by the end of the biennium, then they don't get subsequent funding. That rule can be waived. So if there is something where we say, oh, you know, the rains came in June and they just physically could not get out to that place until July, and that just happened to be the end of the biennium, we would waive that rule, come to you at the July board meeting and say, hey, there's a reason. But this at least says to the grantees, we are very serious that you don't get to play with that. It gives you a stick to use.
This is, Will, so you're catching what had been bugging me in the back of my mind when we talked about this, and I couldn't figure out what it was in the timing of that, because clearly not every project will have its funding set up 2 years in advance. And so this first year of the biennium may be the year in which they acquire that match, and they couldn't necessarily have proven it when they started. So I appreciate your figuring that out and catching it. Feels like the right fix. Other comments, observations on this one? Thank you, guys.
Okay, and then in subsection 8, this is where we move that definition of the grant types down, so it is incorporated into this set of the rules. And I think the last bit is on 0140, waiver and periodic review of the rules. Change that any waiver of the requirements of Division 47 will be reported to the board at the next board meeting.
And then probably with the modification of the amended attachments.
And those were the changes that we made.
Okay. Any other general questions about this? Nobody had ones on the specific terms. So, Bob, are you looking like you've got?
No, I'm
okay.
waiting ready for a motion.
Okay, well, ready to entertain a motion, Randy? Or Bob? Or?
I move the board approve the Focused Investment Partnership Grants Administrative Rules as specified in Attachment C as amended to the staff report.
Second?
Was that it? Did somebody say second?
Yeah,
Bob, okay. Any more discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Yay.
Thank you.
We have a new program.
Good job, Eric.
So any administrative,
Derica, lunch?
and other than that,
And thank you, Bob.
yeah.
No, thank you, OWEB. It has been a pleasure.
All right.